Good afternoon. The Design Review Board 1 public meeting of July 10th, 2008 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones and pagers. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker's cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. You will be called to present a case or speak on a specific item as desired. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent meetings. Current DRB agendas are available by calling our DRB hotline at 818-548-3171 or by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and DRB reconsideration and appeals is available at the table by the front door. Please note that appeals must be filed within either 7 or 15 calendar days of the DRB decision date, depending on the application. The case planner will announce the length of the appeal period with each case. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at his or her discretion. Roll call. Mr. Aliano?
Here.
Mr. Ellis? Absent. Mr. Insua? Absent. Mr. Simonian? Here. Mr. Yu?
Here.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on July 3rd, 2008. Oral communications. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on an item not on the agenda? Nope. Seeing none, we're down to the review calendar. Actually, staff has one announcement. We'd like to request the board move approval of the minutes up next for June 12th and June 26th of this year. Is that all right?
Thank you, Mr. Kiesel, and that's fine. Let's move that item up. Do we want to start with May 26th first?
Actually, June 26th?
Well, it says May 26th on top of the minutes, but I guess it is June 26th.
It is June 26th.
Very good.
Yeah. I didn't notice that.
Yes, so let us start with June 26, 2008 minutes first. Were there any comments on these minutes from the June 26th?
June 26th. No, they were not. I don't see the date here. Where's the date? Where do you see the date?
Well, there's actually 2 minutes. What you're looking at are the June 12th minutes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then there is another one.
I don't think I...
Which was emailed to us, the 26th one.
Correct. Correct. Well, I think the issue that is one little item that we want to discuss on the June 26, 2008 minutes is condition number 7. And condition number 7 reads, the window schedule and elevations shall clearly identify that the wood material shall be aluminum-clad wood.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
What case is that? Address?
It's DRB case number 1-PDR-2007-134-A, 1000 Senningham Drive.
No, sir. It should be Montecito. It should be case number 2008-009-A2061 Montecito. Is that what you?
Yes, I stand corrected. That's correct. Okay, it is a little confusing the way it's presented, but you are
Montecito, right?
correct. It's 2061 Montecito Drive, and it's condition number 7.
Yes, sir.
And so, Mr. Baxter, do you want to very briefly let us know what the issue is that pertains to it, and then we could have a quick discussion on it?
Yes, sir. On Monday, the applicant called, said that he felt staff misrepresented condition number 7, or miswrote condition number 7 of the record of decision that we send out to the applicant, saying, this is a board decision. And so he said, and you had read it, the issue he had a concern with is staff had written aluminum-clad wood window would be the windows for the addition. And he says, that's not what I showed the board. What I showed the board was a quarter panel section that was a vinyl, as he says here, vinyl cladding over solid wood window structure. And he showed that to the board members as what he called a quarter panel. And I listened to the DVD earlier today, in fact, just before the meeting, and the board members, I didn't hear any specific comments while you were looking at the quarter panel. I heard two board members that indicated that the materials were a high quality. One of the board members said that the windows were a high quality. So that's all I heard. So no one said, for instance, vinyl window that you showed us is a good window, but nobody objected to the vinyl window that you showed us either. So what the board looked at was an actual physical structure that was a vinyl-clad wood window. And what he explained to me, on the tape, what it was explained is the vinyl would be on the exterior, wood would be seen from the interior. Vinyl was his choice, or I guess the applicant's choice, because of it sort of has a southwesterly type of exposure, south or west exposure, and he felt that it would hold up to the weather better. And other windows in the house were of that material.
So, Mr. Baxter, just for clarity, what material are the existing windows on the house?
He's saying vinyl clad, and he wanted to match that with what he has now, with what he had shown. And we had recommended the aluminum clad wood.
You'll be able to verify that, right?
Yes,
If there
sir.
actually are vinyl there.
Yes, I can verify that.
Well,
So his request is to have it vinyl clad versus aluminum clad. That's his request.
does the board clearly remember whether the applicant had presented a vinyl-clad window or an aluminum-clad window? I think is the best way to start this discussion. Can't recall.
I think in looking at it, I assumed there was an aluminum clad, just because, to be consistent with all the other projects that we've looked at, we've always recommended that as sort of the base standard for projects. I was just looking at his elevations to see what it called out for the windows, and it just says windows weather shield with clad exterior sage natural interior finish, which I guess doesn't really say either way what that is.
Well, since there's really not a consensus one way or another as to what was presented, and during that day there was 5 members present at the hearing, of which only 3 are present today. 1 had abstained, and 1 had basically voted against the project.
Yes.
And so I think what the board needs to very quickly discuss, and I emphasize quickly, is we want to continue this discussion until next week, when we have the rest of the board members here and we'll have all 5 members, or do we want to very quickly go ahead and make this decision today? I personally think it might be worthwhile just to put off these minutes until next time we meet. That way Mr. Ellis and Mr. Insua will be present, and that way we might have more of a cohesive group, and we might be able to remember what was discussed better.
It's fine with me.
So then, does someone want to make a motion to
I
continue?
would just make a note that,
Yes.
to say that, I think that's something that we can always review when the other people are here, but I just want to make a note that the existing windows as they are, if we say to match those, that's one way to go, but I think another way to see it as the number of windows that are existing compared to the new ones that are coming in, there's substantially a lot more that are going in, and so if we need to, I think it's okay to say go with a
Just
certain
the high
one.
quality, yeah.
Yeah, but, that could be left up to the next, when we have everybody. I'll make a motion to, I guess, move the meeting minutes and this issue in particular until we have a full session.
So more specifically,
Item 7.
the June, yes, item 7
Item 7 on the,
of DRB case number 1-PDR-2008-009-A, we'll basically move that over to the next times. Do we have a second?
Second.
Wonderful. Do we want to basically approve the minutes, the rest of the minutes on?
Yeah, I'm okay with the rest of the minutes.
I was there, I can...
June 12th.
Right. Are we doing June 12th? or
No,
June-
26.
We're still on June 26th. That was one of 4 cases that day.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So,
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Make a motion to approve the rest of the meeting minutes besides the issue that we talked about before.
Yeah, actually,
You can't?
probably should just wait until the next meeting to approve the minutes.
all right.
Just trying to cross things off.
Very good. Then we'll put this aside, Mr. Baxter, until the next time we'll meet, and hopefully with the full board, we'll be able to go through that issue with a more concise decision. And so then let's move to the June 12th minutes. Now that we're at it, might as well just get this over with very quickly.
I had a question about these minutes. Under item 2, bullet point number 2, on that number, it says, consider steel trowel plaster with paint finish and consider stained wood at the front door. I don't remember saying consider steel trowel. I thought we wanted them to do steel trowel. So we say it's a requirement, because these are conditions, so if we're saying consider, then they're not going to do it. So I don't know what the board remember. I don't remember saying consider. I thought it was a requirement.
Yeah, I remember, I think I remember that you did mention steel trowel plaster would be quite nice on that home. And you, in fact, made some comments about the look of it and the finish of it, and it'll have a more rich texture. So I think it's a good idea to delete consider and add in to use it as a
Because
condition.
they provide instead of consider. I think the stained wood was okay to consider. I remember that because they could do other things with the door if they want to. So I guess it would just be the first consider, not the second. So instead of consider, it would be provide.
Okay, we'll make that change.
That's all I had.
So do you want to move to approve the minutes with that one modification, Mr.?
Yes, move for revising the minutes according to my statement.
I second.
Thank you.
Okay, a motion was made to approve the minutes of June 12th, 2008. This will be a roll call. Mr. Aliano?
Yes.
Mr. Yu?
Yes.
Mr. Simonian?
Yes.
Great.
3-0.
Motion carries 3-0. We're on to our review calendar. We don't have any consent items, and we have one case on the regular calendar.
Great. And as a reminder, I just wanted to remind the public that we have one case today, as Mr. Kiesel pointed out, and then we're going to have a very quick discussion afterwards about the design review board process in general and some of the changes that have taken place. And we were hoping to get everyone together, and they knew about it, but obviously some things came up. So we'll go ahead and discuss it, and the public will have an opportunity to hear it as well. And I believe the same is going to occur with Board 2 as well.
Would it make more sense to have it when they're all here? Is it a lengthy preparation? Or?
We can go ahead and we'll have it again for the DRB 2 next week. We'll see if the 2 missing board members can attend next week, and if not, we can make other accommodations.
All right. Very good.
So that's all I wanted to really bring up, so stay tuned for the second portion. So I guess we're done with agenda item number 3, then we could probably move along to our only case for today. Is that right, Mr. Kiesel?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Wonderful. Well, our first case is 1-PDR-2008-020-A, 919 South Central Avenue. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. If you'd like, I can give you a quick tour of the plans that I have posted up behind you. And then I'll give my presentation from there. What we have is a site plan showing the entire commercial property with the proposed sign locations. We have elevations of the front of the building, the back of the building, side versus acacia, and then some other elevations off of the interior of the building. We also have photos of the area and the surrounding property if the board would like, as well as a vicinity map, some examples of the sign faces the applicant is proposing, and then some additional current photos of the commercial development.
Mr. Collins, can you elaborate briefly the main points that staff feels are important to bring up as far as the science program is concerned? What's
I was going to go through my whole presentation,
wonderful,
but if you want me to
go
straight to the
Go through. I thought you were done and you
conclusion,
were
I'll be
walking
glad
away,
to.
and I figured we would.
I just thought I'd
get
give
some
you a
more
quick
information.
intro and tour of the plans first, and then go
Sure.
through the presentation.
Please do. Take
Unless
your
the
time.
board would like to hear the abbreviated version, it's up to you.
No, I think it's important to hear the whole version from A to Z, and we'll take it from there.
I believe this is the first sign program, too, that has come before the board under the new system that we have. So, on that note, as mentioned, this is case number 1-PDR 2008-020A, located at 919 South Central Avenue. The applicant is Abstract Holdings. This is a first-time submittal for the sign program. The commercial development was heard and approved by this board on April 12th of 2007. The applicant is proposing the sign program for a new one-story commercial development, which was approved for its final building inspection on May 16th of 2008. The building is located northwest corner of Central Avenue and Acacia. Since there are more than 2 tenant spaces and the building was built after July 25th of 2000, the sign program is required. The purpose of the sign program is to ensure that the proposed signage is consistent with the architectural style of the building, as well as establish specific design guidelines for any proposed signs. As the writing of this report, the applicant is proposing 6 tenants. Now, this may be changed depending on which tenants come forward and sign leases, so potentially we're looking at 6 tenants. It could be reduced down to 2. Should also be noted that the corner tenant on the Acacia side has a drive-through which comes through the back of the property. You can see it through the site plan, and as of now is a proposed Starbucks coffee house. So they have their signs on the rotunda, which you can see on the elevation, and they also have one facing the parking lot at the back. The subject property is located within the South Central Commercial Study Area. The guidelines state that the architecture and sign should work together to establish an internal, coherent visual identity that is compatible with the signs in the neighborhood, and signs should be designed as architectural elements in their own right, and walls and ground sides should fit in with the style, materials, and colors with the composition and scale of the building facades. The applicant is proposing the following signs for his sign program: wall signs for each tenant space facing central and the parking lot, 1 projecting sign located in northeastern corner of the building, 2 ground signs located adjacent to the drive-through lane, and 2 directional signs located near the driveway and exit of the drive-through. Staff is recommending that the projecting sign be reduced in size such that it comfortably fits within the colored accent band of the above awnings. The neighboring property to the west was developed with a 2-story apartment building. There are windows on the east elevation of this apartment building facing the subject commercial property. Staff is recommending that the proposed wall signs at the west elevation not be illuminated in an effort to eliminate potential impacts on the adjacent residential units. The architectural style for the project, including its colors and materials, appears to be a contemporary design. The sign program proposes the following: a range of color letter types, colors and letter sizes, maximum logo sizes, and general wall sign locations per tenant space. The sign program does not allow box or can signs. It does not restrict letter fonts, and it exempts national, regional, and food-related colors. It will allow sign raceways to be located on the exterior surface of the building. The sign program appears to be similar to various letter types of signs allowed on neighboring buildings, including exterior sign raceways. The intention of the sign program requirements is to provide a more unified approach to signage for the entire commercial development. Staff has concerns based on the examples from the sign program's broad-based provisions outlined, and we have 5 main concerns. The first is that there are 3 types of channel letter signs, including flat surface plexiglass, backlit channel letters with metal finishes or painted surfaces, or reverse channel letters with neon recessed into the channel lettering. Second, all letter fonts. Third, various sizes of letters ranging from a minimum 2 inches to a maximum 6 inches deep, with a minimum height of 12 inches and a maximum of 48. Fourth, various sizes of logos that do not exceed a space more than 3 feet high by 3 feet wide and a minimum 2 inches to maximum 6 inches deep. And finally, various color ranges for sign faces, including blue, green, yellow, white, red, black, brown, and all national, regional, food-related tenant colors. Staff recommends that sign elements within the sign program be limited to those more compatible with the building's contemporary design in order to create visual unity. And a condition has been placed for this recommendation. The proposed sign program, as described, may be acceptable, subject to revisions to narrow its broad-based nature in order to visually unify the signs and the commercial development's contemporary design. If the sign program's requirements were narrowed, staff would support the approval. And we have 10 conditions that are listed. Would you like me to read through those? Or the recommendations that would help make the sign program more consistent and compatible with the architectural style of the building?
Sure, Mr. Collins, before you go into the recommendations, I actually had a question, just so I could follow along more concisely as you move along. The staff concerns that were raised, the 5 items that were raised on page 4, can you more clearly talk about these very quickly as to, are these concerns that they have with the proposed design, or is this what staff would rather see instead?
These are challenges or concerns with the proposed design, and then the fact that what's being proposed is very flexible, and staff feels in order to get the consistency throughout the building that it should be more narrow in nature. That way that the architecture of the signs will be more compatible, and you won't have such a variety of signage out there.
Okay, and so then can you again go over these 5 items? In other words, item number 1, you're seeing 3 different types of signs on there right now, and you'd rather the applicant just pick one and go with one?
Unless the board feels more comfortable with 2 or 1, it's up to the board on what they feel would be the best for the
I see, but
site.
staff feels as though 3 might be too many.
That's correct.
I see. And also, item number 2 is you're seeing different types of fonts, and you rather limit the type of fonts.
That's correct.
So what do you mean by all letter fonts?
Well, there's lots of different fonts that are possible. I think staff is looking for something that's more consistent throughout and not having the variety.
I see. And the various sizes of lettering ranging, okay, so there's a wider range right now as far as the font sizes and the letter sizes, and that kind of goes hand in hand with item number 2. And then we have item number 4, which was a little unclear to me as well, and if you could just explain that.
It's basically similar to the third one. We're looking for conformity or consistency and not having such a range.
And the last one finally about the colors?
There were several colors that were mentioned. The board may want to consider 1 or 2 colors or 3 colors or whatever the board feels would be more consistent with the color palette that's on the building now.
Very good. Okay.
Just staff felt that there was a lot of colors that were shown, but that may be too many.
If I may clarify one point, regarding the fonts, I don't think the recommendation that we're making prevents or restricts the actual fonts. We're saying non-aligned letter forms should be reviewed. So signs where the letters are not aligned, where they go up and down, should be reviewed. But we're not proposing in our recommended conditions or recommendations, we're not proposing a restriction on the fonts. If the board would like to do that, of course you can.
I see. Okay. Well, that was a lot of clarity for me. Perhaps you could continue and go down the recommendations now.
Okay, the first recommendation we have is to reduce the number of channel letter types in the sign program to either backlit channel letters with metal finishes or painted surfaces, or reverse channel letters with neon recessed into the channel letter lighting. Second, to reduce the range of the letter and logo size heights in the sign program to a minimum height of 12 inches and a maximum height of 18 inches for lettering, and logos not to exceed an area more than 24 inches by 24 inches. Third, the projecting sign shall be reduced in size such that it comfortably fits within the colored accent band and placed above the awnings. Fourth, remove the restriction that national, regional, and food-related sign colors are exempt from the sign program. Fifth, eliminate color ranges that clash with the color of the two buildings per planning staff approval. Sixth, the planning division staff shall have the right to approve additional sign colors if they complement the color of the development. Seventh, non-aligned letter forms shall be reviewed and approved by planning staff to determine consistency with the sign program. And eighth, signs that directly face the residential zone shall not be illuminated. 9, submit building elevations with window and door locations and show the specific sign locations, area locations for approval by staff, and window signage shall be limited to open and closed. And then finally, raceways are to be concealed and not be on the exterior of the wall surface.
And what do you mean by raceways?
That's essentially the electrical box that serves
I
the
see.
sign.
Okay. J-box.
The number 8, you're saying signs that directly face the residential zone should not be, illuminated. Okay, I got it. I was reading something else. I got it. Thank you. So there will just be like a, just a standing letter or like a metal letter
Or a logo or
but not painted or not a flat surface, but it could have some relief. Right, okay. So the illumination is an issue because of the residents.
correct.
All right.
As condition, the project would meet the intent of a sign program. The location of the signs are well placed and as conditioned, the size, design, and color of the signs would be compatible and consistent with commercial development and the intent of the design guidelines. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any additional comments. And the applicants and architects are in the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Another question I had, the residential use that's directly west of the subject site, is it multi-family zone?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
I see. Okay. Do we have any other questions for staff?
Not right now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. And, of course, we have a few speakers on this matter. So I'll start off with the architect, and then we'll move down, or do you have a preference? You'd rather have the applicant go first. Very good. Well, we have two applicants. We have Tony Rector and Artak Davatian. So who would rather go first?
I represent the sign company.
Well, we can't have cross-communication, but Artak, do you want to go first? Very good. So we have Artak Davatian. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. My name is Artak Davatian. I'm part of Abstract Holdings. Basically, I'll just go over the recommendations that staff made. Starting with number 1, basically picking two different, if we were restricted to different sign types, we would probably choose the reverse channel or channel with acrylic face. Basically, the channel with the acrylic face is what's proposed by Starbucks currently, and the reverse channel is another sign type that we would consider as well. And basically, the recommended item from staff is the reverse channels, but that's not what Starbucks already proposed, which is the channel with acrylic face. I think that needs to be corrected by staff, so that way, I think they're trying to get consistency, but that's not what Starbucks proposed.
Understood. Okay.
I'm not. And then item number 2 is the restriction on the heights and logos. I think that should be dictated by the code itself rather than anything on any sign program, because we might have potentially 3 tenants rather than 6 tenants, and that can dictate the length of the wall, which is what's required, what is used to require the height and length of the sign itself. So I think the code should overrule in that aspect. Item number 3, the projected sign proposed by Starbucks. I'll have the Starbucks representative handle that issue and clarify that. And just for clarification, the projected sign proposed by Starbucks is over the canopy and not the awning, and I think that's not over the rotunda, but actually the other side of the building. So I just want to clarify that as well. It's over the canopy and not the awning. And item number 4 is a restriction on national and regional tenants. Thank you. I don't think they should be restricted to whatever font color proposed in the sign program, rather than what their actual identity is and their image. And I think that's one of the key points to any retailer is their brand identity. And if we take that away from them, I don't think this economically it's vital to the center. I mean, it is economically vital to the center because potentially it can eliminate prospective tenants coming to the center where I can sign a lease and go through the whole process. At the end of the day, if they're not allowed to put their sign on the building, they will terminate the lease. And that restricts me, restricts the center, and also it's not in the public's best interest to have an empty center and to have tenants that are not moving in to a center that is potentially going to benefit the community. On item number 5 is the color ranges. I don't think we should restrict color ranges because, like I said, there's going to be multiple colors proposed by different tenants, and different tenants have different ideas and different concepts. And if we start restricting them based on my building's color, today it's green, tomorrow I can decide to change the color to a more contemporary color 5 or 10 years down the line, and it'll be never ending. We'll start restricting color after color, and it'll be an ongoing process coming into the board and changing the color because of the clashing. And I don't think it's not something that we want to go down the road. It's not the idea of the sign program to restrict creativity of tenants, even though there's got to be some sort of consistency. Item number 6, I'm definitely okay with staff approving other colors. If it was up to me, I would probably propose all the different palettes and have staff ultimately judge if it's appropriate for the center or not. That way, if something is creative and potentially useful for the community, I would want that to be allowed rather than restricted. And item number 7, again, non-aligned letters. I rarely see that, and most of the tenants have a single line, and I'm fine with them overruling or overseeing the sign, the proposed sign by the tenant. Item number 8, we don't have any currently proposed signs directly facing any residential zone. It's commercial zoned. Everything off Central is commercial zoned.
Talking about Central, we're talking about the back.
We don't have any signs proposed in the back.
Does.
I think we've eliminated that once. That one sign is basically over the drive-through window is the only one that is in concern. And we can basically, right. I think we can probably do away with that sign rather than putting that as a restriction, because I think it's one of the signs that it's not necessarily needs to be there. And item number 9, again, I feel that it should be dictated by the code as to what's restricted and what's allowed on the doors of the tenants. And obviously, I would definitely, if it's anything to be considered, the open and close sign is not enough. I would definitely want at least store hours on the window itself rather than just open and closed. But again, I would prefer it to be dictated by the current code. And item number 10, raceway signs should be concealed. Currently, the Starbucks is proposing a concealed sign, but they're a more permanent tenant and they're pretty much there for a long-term tenancy. There's other tenants that might be moving in, which may not be there for long-term and shorter-term. So basically, I would prefer it to be on a raceway and exposed. What this does is it eliminates any potential leaks, any issues that I may have because of the raceway. The way it's designed is there's not going to be multiple penetrations through the wall, which penetrate the waterproofing membranes, and that potentially causes leaks down the road. It may not cause it within the next year, but eventually 3 or 4 years down the line, it's going to cause problems for us. So that way, I would prefer a flexibility in having it on raceway as well as affixed to the wall, which is a concealed type. And it's pretty much the comments that I have. I'll allow Starbucks representative to come up and add to anything, and if there's any questions you guys may have, I'll be more than happy to answer it, or if there's any clarifications.
I had number 10 about the raceway.
Yes.
So you prefer to have a raceway?
I prefer for shorter-term tenants, I prefer to have a raceway, which is the mom and pop, and because there's more turnaround. Starbucks is an established brand, and I know they're going to be there for a definitive time, for at least a period of time that's longer term of a lease is what they have. And other tenants, mom and pops, are usually the lease terms are shorter. For example, 3 years, 5 years, and after a while, some tenants unfortunately don't last 2 or 3 years. So we have a turnaround in the center, and multiple times when they turn around, there's multiple penetrations, and we can never get the center looking the way it is originally with all the multiple penetrations. But this way, the exposed raceway conceals the penetrations, and it's more of a consistent look on the exterior.
But the raceway means you have a raceway and then you attach the signage to the raceway.
Correct. So rather than...
They'll be elevated, they'll be offset from the surface, and you'll always see the raceway behind the letters.
It's true, but this way, the raceway, I don't see it as a problem. There's 2 ways of doing it. I think they're both appropriate. It just depends on the tenant and preference. It's not a critical point, but it's a liability on the landlord's aspect and point of view. And if there's multiple tenants that leave the space or within X amount of years change tenancies, then we're going to have a problem with the building itself, because we can never match the Stalco to the original building, because now we're going to have different patches and different textures on the building.
Yeah, but how do you determine how long the raceway is going to be? Say you have a 8-foot raceway, and the tenant comes in later and puts in a 4-foot sign. You're going to have a raceway that sticks on both sides.
Well, it depends on the amount of tenants I have.
Right.
So if I would presume the maximum allowed will be enough to cover that, rather than a tenant. I don't think any tenant. I mean, the most important thing for a tenant is the signage. If we can't give them whatever's maximum allowed by code, believe me, the tenant will propose that sign. So I don't think that a potential tenant is going to reduce the signage, or any tenant coming in replacing the previous tenant will have a smaller sign than the previous tenant. If anything, it's going to be larger. I've never seen it to be smaller. Even if if there's for example, a shorter name on it, I don't know, ABC, rather than a whole word, the ABC will be the size of the previous maximum allowed, which is dictated by the storefront frontage facing Central or whatever the main street is. So that's the way I look at it in that aspect.
Is there any way to provide some kind of backdrop in front of the raceway?
Well, the raceway is going to be always painted the same color as the building, so it'll die out. So you won't really see the raceway. It's not designed to stand out. It's designed to blend in to the background.
Right. It'll create a shadow line.
Right.
As far as the tenancy is concerned right now, it might be 2 tenants, it might be 3 tenants, it might be more. Can you give us a feel for where your leasing is right now, and if you're talking to national guys, or if you're talking to regional guys or local guys?
Well, we typically don't discriminate as far as tenancy, but we're accepting all applications, and obviously our minimum tenancy is going to be 3 rather than 2. I think just want to clarify.
I see. And do you already have a signed lease with Starbucks, or are you well on your way to having a lease signed with Starbucks? Or
Starbucks' lease has been signed probably well over 6 months ago, close to a year. They're currently almost completed their interior TI improvements, and they have all the plans, permits, everything submitted to the city, and they should be completed construction within the next 15 days.
I see.
And they'll be ready to open, but they will not open until they have the sign up.
I see. And of course, some of these conditions that are, or recommendations that are being brought forward pertain to Starbucks, but most of them maybe do not. The way I'm reading it, and some of the questions that you're bringing up, and some of the issues you're bringing up, you're really more concerned about the other 2 spaces.
Right, the other spaces, and I don't want it to be dictated solely on Starbucks and the sign program to be designed around Starbucks, because obviously, as you guys heard in the news, there's stores that close and there's stores that open. We never know what's coming in and what's going out. So I don't want it to be designed around Starbucks. It's got to be designed around the center, the community, and what the surrounding area supports, rather than specific tenant. It shouldn't be tenant-driven. It should be flexibility on different tenants, and allows the landlord, the developer, or whoever potentially is going to develop, to look at the sign program and say, yeah, you know what, there's City of Glendale allows and is flexible and is open to creativity and other signs and different tenants, rather than restricting tenants on their signage. And like I said, brand identity, Starbucks has built their brand identity, and or just like McDonald's, the sign, their logo. I mean, everybody knows them, the M. You can't tell them to change that M. If we tell them otherwise, they're not gonna close down their other stores or change their thousands of other store signs just for one location. They might go down the street or go down to another city. I don't want that.
Item number 2, which relates to the logo, and staff is recommending a 24 by 24, and you had made a comment that perhaps we should let code dictate the size of the logo.
Okay.
You know your project best because you've been working on it. According to code, how big could these logos go on this building based on the keeping Starbucks and having 2 other tenants on the other side?
Okay. I believe available signage that we have is about 3 to 4 feet above the storefronts. That's the height. Obviously, the length is depending on how many tenants occupy the building itself, and I would probably say 3 feet.
I see. So if staff's recommending 2 and you believe 3 feet is something that
Correct.
would be more doable?
Right.
Or would be more in line with code?
Correct.
And as far as the colors, you had mentioned that you would prefer to actually go through a palette of colors and make suggestions.
Right.
Have you gone through that exercise? Are you willing to go through that exercise?
I'm willing to go through the exercise. It's just that I was told, I was instructed or recommended to pick certain colors. I don't want to do. I didn't want to do that initially, but obviously it's got to be some sort of consistency. I would prefer it to be an open palette.
I see.
We can eliminate some fluorescence or whatever that's not tasteful or in good taste. I'm open to that, but I'd rather have an open palette rather than a closed palette because it might potentially leave something worthwhile of picking. I don't want to restrict anything.
Okay.
That's my whole objective.
Do we have any more questions for the applicant?
No, I'm okay.
No?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next speaker, who is also labeled as an applicant, is Tony Rector.
Good evening. Excuse me, good evening. Just point of clarification.
If you would state your name for the record.
Yes, Tony Rector, R-E-C-T-O-R, and I am the authorized agent for Superior Electrical Advertising, the sign company. I do not represent Starbucks. Starbucks is a client of Superior Electrical Advertising. And first things first, and that is I want to give a compliment to staff because we've been working with them on this project and made a number of the modifications that are in their recommendations going forward. There's a couple issues that the property owner has brought up which concern me, and that is that when we originally created this design in February of '08, which is on the rendering there on the first page, we have property owner sign-off on each of the pages. And so the gentleman prior to me just had mentioned about the elimination of the west elevation sign, and this was approved by him when we presented the sign program and the sign criteria for the project.
Who's him? Who approved it?
The
applicant. I see, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And speaking to that issue, we are proposing a 36-inch circle logo, a Starbucks logo, rather than the 24 the staff is recommending. And if you'll look at page 8, you'll see that we're proposing an illuminated sign. Speaking on the sign companies we have no problem whatsoever. As a matter of fact, we share the concern of staff insofar as the illumination to the residents and neighbors behind the building. However, what we would like to see is we would like to see the original 36 logo rather than the 24, because one of the factors of the site is that all the parking is in the rear. And as the gentleman was just saying, there's going to be multiple tenants in there, 2 or 3, what have you. And so when your parking is in the rear and there's going to be traffic basically going to Starbucks, we want to make sure that they know where the Starbucks is located, at what site of the building versus the other 2 tenants, and I think the other 2 perhaps proposed tenants, and I believe that the other tenants would want to have their logo or signage of some sort on the rear of the building, because again, that's where the parking is going to be, and there's a drive-through at the rear of the building of which they're going to have to come through and then navigate themselves to the right or the left of where they want to go.
Very, very quickly on that note, so there's 2 round Starbucks signs that we're talking about right now. There's only 2 of them. One is on Central as you're traveling southbound, is right next to the facade over here, and the other one is in the rear, right?
Yes, sir, and that's the illuminated. That's the one that we're proposing to be illuminated, but we can't construct that and install it as non-illumination. That one sign, yes, sir.
I see, and so this is proposed to be 3 feet, and these letters, or how big are these letters on the rotunda?
16 inches, I think.
Yeah, 16.
Okay.
And the other point of clarification I wanted to make is that if you look at your renderings, the renderings we proposed on page 6, you'll see that we're proposing internally illuminated channel letters. And then we detail it out in terms of the colors and the types of material. But it originally was proposed to be white neon. It's going to be LEDs. And so if we're going with LEDs, they have to be encapsulated within the sign itself.
Are you on page 7?
I'm on page,
Yeah, 7.
yeah.
Okay. You said 6.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at, no, excuse me.
Okay, that makes more sense. Go ahead.
And that's really it. As I mentioned, the compliments to the staff in terms of their detailing out the city's needs and wants as they saw it, and we I believe have measured up to their expectations. But the rear signage is vital to I would think it's vital to Starbucks insofar as being the 36-inch rather than the 24 as staff has recommended.
Okay. And as far as the illumination goes, any comments on that?
It can be, if it's not illuminated, certainly that's easy enough for us to do.
So that's not really an issue?
No, not really, and especially if I may, on a personal note, I'd rather see it non-illuminated also. I didn't even think about the residents when I visited the site, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
A couple questions.
Go ahead.
I guess the first one is, so then, I'm sure these were approved, as you said, by the owners, and you've also worked with Starbucks to make sure that the minimum size and where they're located and those kinds of things are sort of approved by Starbucks as well. I guess, does Starbucks usually show up for these kind of meetings, or do you take care of that for them?
This is the fourth one I've been to on a solo act, so I can't really speak for Starbucks.
Yeah, it just seems a little weird that we're going to be making decisions on their signs, reducing them, making them bigger, whatever, and they're not here to say yes or no. I guess it goes back to the owner, but the representation of the lettering and where they lie on the elevations is kind of confusing me a little bit, just because these are supposed to be exactly sort of what you see on each elevation and how you're... And for example, on page 3, the south elevation shows the Starbucks starting off on the rotunda, and then going across, and then you see it on east elevation as it comes across. In the front of the place, and the drive-through sort of ends at the end of the rotunda as you see it. And then when I see the other elevation, it shows the drive-through almost all the way inside the rotunda, and so I'm kind of confused on where it actually lies.
Would that be on page 2?
Let me find that quick. Where is that? Well, I guess it would be this one, A3.2.
That's the architect's rendering. That's not ours, sir.
Okay, so that wouldn't be yours then, okay. I guess they're conflicting then.
So that might have been done at different times, but is your package the more accurate one as to what's being proposed and what we should consider?
I believe so.
Okay.
Okay, so then as you're coming down on Central, all you would really see is just maybe Fee drive-through?
Yes, exactly, and the blade sign.
Okay.
Or what we call a blade sign, which is the circle logo there.
Yeah, see, because he's showing it here too. This is the architectural, so. But it's just, I was thrown off by that.
Right.
But that thing is wrapping, it's showing it wrapping all the way into here.
Right. So we could basically
Okay,
find
I
out
guess we'll
their
go by
intent,
that.
and then we can
Okay.
maybe adjust that, because that might have been a
Yeah, more.
misrepresentation of...
Okay.
Okay. And maybe the architect could actually help us out, because he's the last speaker, unless you have any more questions.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question, actually.
Aliana?
I have one question. On page 2, where you call out sign F, can you explain that a little bit? It says to
That's the
remove-
circular logo.
that's E.
Sign F details are on page 10.
Yeah, but E is the circular, the blade, right?
Just hold on.
I'm looking at the plan,
Yeah.
but then there's F right at the corner, and there's a note here that says, remove sign G due to redundant stop sign word on ground.
Oh,
Sign F is directional, so is that like what is that?
that's the speaker, that's part of the speaker menu signage.
Oh, because you're entering here and you're going there, okay.
Sign F is a directional sign.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but sign F is a directional sign. One that's located right at the driveway.
Those them where the drive-through is. Is there a photo of that?
On page
Because it would
13.
be on this corner, right? It would be on this corner.
That's correct, on page
It's not
13.
shown.
Page 13 are the elevations for sign F.
Okay.
And it is a directional sign. Is that what you've got, Tony?
Yes.
Let's see.
Mr. Aliana, do you have any more questions for him?
No, I'm a little confused though. With this sheet 13, it doesn't seem to be as clear. So I'll figure it out.
Okay, and then if not, maybe we could call them back and we'll ask some questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sako Marcusi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Simonian, members of Design Commission. My name is Sako Marcusi. I'm the project architect. Couple of concerns, not concerns, more of issues that I'd like to come in defense of Starbucks signs. The one logo sign on the west elevation of Starbucks, it's they originally had proposed a 4-foot diameter sign, and I reduced it to 36 inches because I thought that was overwhelming. And in terms of facing that residential, gentlemen, this sign is located 120 feet from our property line. There's another 10 to 15 feet of driveway that the residential apartment to the west of us. And we have all along the westerly property line, we have a line of canopy trees, I think in excess of, 7 or 8, I think. Every 20 feet we have a tree, canopy trees that they're going to be growing in I think in the maturity probably, 35, 40 feet. And that's going to create a complete screening. And besides the fact that our parking has lighting standards, 11 of them, which they have a lot more light and glare than just one single little logo, which is 120 feet away from our property. So I think having that logo there, the sign there, I don't think it would be, in any sense, an intrusion to the neighbors to the west in terms of their visual, let's say, clutter or whatever you might want to call, or visual pollution. It's I hardly think that would be noticeable from that building. So that's that. To address Mr. Yu's concern, yeah, that is a drafting error on architecture. What is shown on their site plan, Starbucks, it's more accurately represented on page 2 of their site plan. That's where their signage is for their drive-through and the Starbucks sign. And it shows also on their elevations. We have picked it up correctly on our east elevation, but our interior elevation, which is the courtyard elevation, I guess our staff people, when they wanted to actually show that there would be a signage that you would see from there. So they didn't accurately project that sign on that elevation. But it is, you will probably see a part of that drive-through on that rotunda, just part of that drive-through sign, yeah. In terms of range of colors or font, I believe I have done a lot of office buildings, and when it comes to office buildings and addressing or limiting their typeface, fonts, and the styling, absolutely, I control that because, it's mainly informational, tenant's name, you have a directory, you have door signs, you have name of a building, and everything to be consistent. But when it comes to multi-tenants that are retailing rather than giving you a service, they do want to be recognized. And you really cannot prevent them from putting a sign that suits them best in terms of, as long as it fits within the parameters of our codes. And I think in addition, it creates a variety and gives a vitality to the center. If this were an institution of any type, yeah, I would put them all same type of lettering, same type of size of their letters and logos and whatnot. But when you're talking about retailers, they really have a lot to say in what they want on their building or on their tenant space, and we could restrict them somewhat, but not limit them from their creativity and their marketing abilities.
And as far as that question was concerned that I raised earlier, as far as the other two tenants,
Yes.
putting Starbucks aside, and how code would relate to the signage, more specifically on the sign of the logo, do you also agree that a 3x3 would be more appropriate? You see that as a more appropriate size, or do you see bigger, smaller? Where do you see that?
Yeah, I think really, I'm not the landlord, but if you're asking my opinion, I think we could go to a smaller logo, if anything, on the smaller tenants, because after all, they're not the anchor in this building. But if they become an anchor, they would want to be representing the center, so then you would be putting a restriction on them.
Okay.
But I think 3 feet, let's say I don't know how wide that, I think our band is 4 feet, so I would also would like to see signage that fits within the band, the sign band, as I call it, but
Sure.
I wouldn't want it to be projecting beyond that. So 3 feet falls within that 4 feet space or band, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to not limit them to 24 inches. Let's say that the entire 3 bays might be taken by one tenant, which is about a little bit over 4,000 square feet, I believe. So if it happens, then it's a major tenant in this building, and they might want to put just one sign, maybe at the center with a logo. So to put restrictions on them might be a little bit harsh.
And as far as what you've proposed, the package that you proposed, are you clearly defining some sort of differentiation between the national guys and the national tenants and the local mom and pop tenants?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I mean, for now, that's how it is. I want to give nationally recognized tenants their logos and their color and their branding. So I don't want to force them I don't think I can force them because they will not just come into the center, you know.
And then with the local mom and pop,
Yes, we could control that.
We
with
control
this
that with-
program, yes.
that's right. Okay.
I think variety is not bad. You know, in the old Soviet Union, all you could find is maybe Volga and Maz, two type of vehicles, and maybe 2 or 3 color choices. But imagine, you know, if we do that to all our buildings, you know, what would happen?
Thank
How big is the raceway?
Raceway measures about 4 inches or so in height, and about the same depth, 4.5 inches in depth. And the length runs the length of the signage. But one good thing about raceway is the penetrations are very minimal, maybe 2 for actually anchoring and 1 main for the electrical. And once you bring the electrical wiring into the raceway, it goes into the raceway and it feeds all the lettering. So when a tenant moves, you could just pull out the raceway and all you have is 3 holes. Most likely, they might use the same holes to anchor their raceway, or they might just leave the raceway and try to fit their lettering on that raceway. So, you know, what happens, I've had centers where we had individual letters, which unfortunately, there was a lot of, the transition was so often, especially nowadays in this economy. So people just leave, you know, they leave their signage and whatnot. You have to pull them out, and after a few times, you know, you make it like a sieve, you know, you fill all these holes, but none of them are consistent and they don't have any structural integrity. So you really, you either have to design a backboard which you could actually remove and replace it, which that has to be part of your architectural design, but then you're limiting your signage area. So they always have to use those. Or you have to sort of minimize it. And, you know, Arda made a good comment. If that whole 3 bays is taken by one major tenant that wants to put their signage, they could put individual letters on a back wall. They don't have to go on a raceway because I think they're more permanent, but transitional tenants, it's a problem.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for the architect?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, since we really don't have any more other cards for anybody from the public, so I'm not sure if you need to have a rebuttal, because I think all the issues have been raised. If we have any questions, we'll certainly call you up. So with that, I'd like to close the public portion and to discuss this amongst us. So who wants to start, since we don't have a full boat here? Mr. Ariano, perhaps you want to take a stab at this and start the process and the conversation?
It looks like it's probably going to be an interesting conversation, so might as well get started. First of all, I'd like to say, I think this package is very nicely done. I had a little bit of a hard time, a couple of pages, but once you look at it, you know, you can really see what you're trying to do very clearly, and it's really a nice model, I think, for other applicants to look at. Very clear. Having said that, also the building looks pretty good. Very nice job on the building. I have to say that, you know, we have to. One of the things I think it's important to discuss as a board is that we're going to be seeing. We've seen a lot of these buildings. We're going to be seeing more. They're going to have a sign program. And the thing about this building is that it is a commercial building. It's not an institution. It's not a law offices or doctor's offices. So it's a commercial building, so there's going to be a lot of turnaround. There's going to have to be some flexibility. As nice as the building looks, you will have through time some different looks of the building because the signage might change because of the tenants, sort of this flux of tenants. With the exception of tenants like Starbucks, which will probably be there for a very long period of time. So if I consider the signage program from that perspective, I sort of share the concerns of the applicant. You know, they can't really limit too much because then they won't get the tenants. If they don't get the tenants, there's no business in that corner. If there's no business, the building is going to disappear or go into disrepair and so on. So, as a community, as a board, I think that needs to be really considered. And I really understand all the concerns that the staff has made. I mean, they're all very legitimate concerns. It's just that I think it's not, we have to really be probably somewhere in the middle rather than just too much to one side and too much to the other, in order for these projects to really be viable. So in terms of the Starbucks program, or the signs for Starbucks, not the whole program, I really don't have concerns. The issue with the 3-foot diameter, 2-foot diameter logo in the back, it's not going to get illuminated. And when you look at the elevation, the 3-foot seems fairly proportional to the elevation. The 2-foot may end up being a little puny. So I'm willing to let that one go, and it is in the rear. And I personally would not mind it if it was illuminated, but I would go along with staff. Because, as the applicant said, there's going to be a lot of illumination in the parking lot. And the way the Starbucks signs are, we all know them, they're not really bright. I mean, they're just very subtle, very nicely done. So I don't have concerns about that, but I'll go along with that if that would be a sort of a compromising piece. Let's see, if I go through the signs, I'm okay with A, B, E, the fins. So I think for me, the signage, the part of the signage program that's more of an issue is what the comments from staff actually relating to, which have to do with future tenants that we can't really control yet because they're not there. There was a time when I thought, we shouldn't allow all these logos to kind of be dispersed through our facades, but I came to the understanding that, as made evident today by the applicant, is that if you ignore the big national labels, you won't get those companies in those buildings. And usually those are the ones that usually do a nicer job on the interiors because they have a lot of funds and they have a lot of support. And so I think that's okay to encourage that. I think as long as staff is involved with a program like this where there might be for example, let me read a sentence here. Like number 6 says, the planning division staff shall have the right to approve additional sign colors if they complement the color of the development. I think that's a very reasonable statement. I think it's something that the applicant and the city can work together to achieve something that's pleasing to everybody. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can achieve today, where we can make sort of restrictions like that. There are restrictions, but at the same time, there's a little communication, open communication in terms of, because we don't know who these people are going to be. I mean, we don't know who these tenants are going to be. So I think the dialogue is important. If Panda Express comes there, we know what their logo is, and we know for sure, then we would say we accept it or not. I mean, usually a lot of these great logos are quite nicely done. I mean, they spend millions of dollars probably trying to get these things, done. Excuse me. So I would say that we should probably at least figure out a way to restrict what the staff is trying to restrict without mandating every little thing, because it might cause a lot of hardships for the applicant and with the tenants. So let me briefly go through each of these bullet points to make sure that I don't miss anything. The number 2, as far as the range of sizes, if we go with number 2 the way it's written, then that would mean that the signage by Starbucks will be okay except for the logo. So we have to kind of come to an agreement that maybe we can make an exception maybe for that logo, and then the thing is the 24-inch logo is very small for some companies. I think even Panda Express, their little circle is probably not even 24 inches. But again, that could be left to the discretion of the city when they come up and with a tenant and say, for example, we're looking at it today with Starbucks being a 3-foot diameter in proportion to the building where it's located. It doesn't look that bad. It's just the idea that it's big, that probably is shocking to people. So, number 3, projecting sign shall be reduced in a size that is comfortably fits with the color accent. I think that's a reasonable statement. I will go with that. Number 4, remove the restriction that national, regional. This is the one that I think is more of a point that's a little bit difficult to negotiate, because basically we're saying, that we have to restrict these international companies to come in, or, maybe another way to say number 4 would be not to use the word exempt, to say that these national or regional food-related signs, colors, and so on, need to be reviewed by the city, or at least there should be some concurrence. That sort of goes back to number 2, which is the main statement of all this, where it talks about the 18-inch high and the 24-inch diameter. So number 4, I think, could be edited a little bit to satisfy everyone. Number 5, eliminate color ranges that clash. That one is a little bit difficult because, Panda Express has reds. And the building, there's no reds on the building. It's all sort of yellow, and it's a very nice green that you picked out. So again, the number 5 kind of contradicts the logo, the regional logo concern. If somebody comes in with a regional logo, they're not going to, Panda Express is not going to change their sign from red to purple. Right. So there's a conflict there. We need to come to terms with that. But again, that could also, but I would say number 5 is probably applicable to the companies that don't have an international or a national or regional logo. Those, like you said, you could control them. You could say, try to blend or complement some of the signage that's already on the building. And I think they probably do that because they don't have a distinct label, some of them, I would say. Number 6, Planning Division to approve additional signage. I think that's a fair statement. Number 7, non-aligned, that one I need to read it. I think that's a fair statement as well. Basically, signage should align, it should be coordinated. Number 8, signs that directly face the residence zone. We already discussed that, and I think I'll go along with that. Number 9 is submit building elevations. Now, that one I had a question, actually. The number 9, does that mean, is this in relation to future signage? Other tenants that come in, they have to come in to the city. Okay.
Yeah, the sign program.
That seems very reasonable to me. Although I don't understand what you said in the last sentence where it says window signage shall be limited to open or close. What is that?
We can include the hours on that, if it pleases the board. Very often, lots of retail spaces want to, they hang a lot of, sale, all kinds of stuff on the window signs. And this is, as you mentioned, a very handsome building with lots of clear glazing to activate the street frontage. And if we had a lot of window signs allowed on that, that would really detract from the well-designed complex.
Right. Okay, so I agree with number 9 then. Number 10, I think we need to discuss a little bit. I have an issue with raceways, but I understand the issue with the applicant, because if it's not say a Panda Express that are going to be there for a long time, and it's more of a small business that might not last as long or might want to move around, obviously the raceway would be more appropriate, but then it just makes the signs look that like they're not really designed. It makes them look temporary. And I wonder whether this is one of those situations, because there really aren't that many. We're talking primarily about 3 right here. Well, actually it's 4. Is this is part of Starbucks or not? Just this, right? Okay. So you would have these other, but this could be one. This is one big tenant, right? Yeah. I don't know if you put 3 raceways here, this tenant might not put 3 signs, or they may put 3 different signs, but different from each other. I don't know. I have an issue with the raceway. I think that one is in a building like this, it will just look like these things are just being planted on and not being part of the building. So, anyways, I'm willing to kind of discuss that amongst ourselves and see what we all think. But other than that, I think we've done a really nice job with this program, and if we can come to some agreement on some of these, I think it'll be beneficial to everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Yu?
Okay. I guess this is an experience for us. Since I personally haven't reviewed many signage packages, and so it's sort of a, I don't want to say, I guess it's a learning experience as we go through this for me too. But I think I concur with most of the points that Soliano made. I'm okay with the signage on the Starbucks portions of them. I'm okay with the 36-inch. I think, just look at the elevation. It actually looks pretty small on there, and so I think it works as a directional signage as you're talking about. My only concern might be the awning that's right under it. It'll probably cut off half of the signage from most of the parking lot, I think. So maybe just take a look at that just to make sure. Let's see. I'm okay being illuminated. I think you're right. The parking lights are probably going to wash that out anyway.
Yeah.
It seems to be, from the pictures, some, decently sized trees that are there. So I think that's going to cover some of that, especially the one that's on the corner already. It's a pretty big tree. I think the blade sign on there, it's okay. I'm okay with that. The drive-through signage is okay. I think the only thing, and one confusion that I might need to be clarified when we submit this and kind of go through it is, we have the package from the architects regarding the signage for the rest of the building, and then we have the package for the Starbucks in particular, and one kind of crosses over into the other, and I know it's not meant to say that it's going to be like this, but there might be some confusion on where that is, so maybe clearly we can cross out the Starbucks portion on this one, on the architecture one. On the signage, I guess, by Glendale regulations, we don't restrict raceways, right? They don't say no raceways allowed.
That's correct.
That's correct, right? I too think that raceways are not going to look that great on there, but for what they're doing, they seem to have a good sense for how they're approaching the building and those kinds of things. So it builds some kind of credibility with me in the sense that I was at the building and it looks nice. They did a good job on it. That they'll want to carry that through. So I'd prefer to see maybe a larger background in front of the raceway, and you're still able to keep sort of the benefits of having the raceway, but still have a surface that is more, I guess, monotone or carried through the building, and then the layers can be applied to there.
What do you think about that backboard idea, where there's some sort of a permanent backboard with the raceway behind it?
Yeah, I think that would be a better approach for me personally, but because you're right. What if their name is ABC and it's centered and you got these 2 feet of raceway sticking on each side, and you paint it the same color, but you're gonna have this huge 4-inch shadow line everywhere cast. It's actually gonna make the sign look pretty pretty bad, I think. But I'm okay if I guess that's a small thing for me. Then it's not.
Let me ask this: is it possible? Because I almost think that maybe in this situation, the thing is with the raceway. Correct me if I'm wrong. The other specialist on signs, the raceway has to be there because that allows you maximum flexibility in how you wire each light, right? Each letter. Is there any other way to do that without, in other words, to have a J-box in the wall that gets painted the same color with a plate, and somehow maybe put the J-box in such a way that it's always behind the letters? Is there any other way to wire the letters without a raceway?
I'm no expert on manufacturing, installation, or electricity, but yes, there is. In the number of projects that I've been involved with, yes, there is. If I may add an addendum, and that is that the only problem, looking at the other tenant space, the only problem is that where do you put it? You see, you have 3 suites there that are vacant, hopefully just for one other tenant. So then they would have to bring in a licensed electrician to put that in, and signage companies are C45s. We hook up to existing electrical.
And the best signage, obviously, is one that's lighted from, lighting of the face of the sign is probably not ideal, because then you get shadows. Because I was thinking you could locate some lights on that extension, that little overhang. But I don't think that's really a good way to go. All right, well, okay, see what you think.
Well, I generally agree with all the thoughts that have been raised so far, and I also like to comment and just talk very briefly about the design and also the execution of the construction and the details. And it's done very nicely. The building shows well. You could tell that the architect and the owner stayed on top of it and got the contractor to build a quality building, which also tells me that they're going to stay on top of it as well moving forward and maintaining the building and making sure that the signage is installed in such a manner that complements the design. So that is very reassuring. I'm also a little bit troubled by the fact that there's 4 lease signs up there, and it's a function of the economy. And so here they have a center that they've done a good job in. They've put the street lights up, and they've put the street trees up, and it's a functioning center with no tenant. And when the economy is good, you tend to lease these things up way before the grand opening, and that's how you really started off with a grand opening. And so when we were looking at this, and I remember I was president of the board, and so was Mr. Aliano, we were excited about this project because it was somewhat of a catalyst for the area, so we're looking for that. And so the idea is to come up with some sort of flexibility in these signage, so the landlord could get tenants in there and could start servicing that loan, and to make sure that this building stays for a while. I know those are economic issues, but at the same time, it was one of the first things that popped into my mind is we need to be somewhat flexible and try to come up with signage programs moving forward that complement the vision that staff has, the vision that we have as a city, as a quality-oriented development, one that attracts quality buildings, and one that sustains that look. So I think that's important as well. And so what we're having today is a conversation of where that fine line is and how do we come up with a program that really satisfies the intentions of the city and also the intentions of the developer and so forth that are well-intentioned as well. And so I'd like to very quickly go down those recommendations as well. And I must add that, Mr. Collins, you did a wonderful job outlining these. It really makes these discussions a lot easier to follow. It's, I think, commendable that you've done this, because when we look at a holistic building at times, we could very easily just not even really focus on the verbiage as much and just look at the overall building design. But when we look at such a minute and focused issue of signage, this kind of a breakdown certainly helps us. It gives us an idea of all the discussions that have taken place. We could only imagine what the discussions that have taken place and the general flavor of where things are. So I appreciate that. And so very quickly I'm going to go through it because we have only one case tonight, so we've talked a lot about it, so I'm going to be very brief. The applicant himself said that the reverse channels or channels with acrylic face for number 1 are okay, and so therefore we could probably limit it to 2 then instead of 3. So I think that was something that you brought forward, and I think that accommodates everybody. Again, I'm okay with number 2 being a 3-foot logo for the national guys. When I'm looking at the overall general mass of the building, 3 feet seems to work. 2 feet might be a little confined, it might be small. As far as number 3 is concerned, I'm absolutely in line with that thought that it should fit comfortably within the colored accent, and there should be some sort of a border above it and below it. What the scale of that border is, I'm going to let the architect work that out with staff, and I think it just all depends on the signage itself and what we're proposing. But it shouldn't really go to the top of the band. that won't look good. And I think what's been illustrated anyways has a border. So I'm okay with number 3. Number 4, and again, I think the most important thing is to try to get as many national retailers at the center as possible. What that's going to do is bring a lot of draw here. And I've personally been involved with negotiations with retailers and trying to sign the lease and so forth. And they put the burden on the landlord, and they'll say, well, you go ahead and get this for us, and if you get this kind of a signage which fits our logo, we'll go ahead and sign the lease and we'll move forward. So then the landlord has to, or the applicant has to come and deal with the city, delays the whole process. So I think there should be somewhat flexibility in the national retailers. And I say this because they've spent a lot of time and efforts and energy coming up with a logo. And that logo seems to work. And everyone's comfortable with it. And if a logo doesn't work, most of the national retailers will go ahead and modify it with time anyways. So it's really capitalism at its best. The system is working, it's flushing itself out. Now with the local and regional guys, that is absolutely something that we could have some control over. And I think that's what really staff is really trying to push here is the fact that when you get the local guys and the regional guys that don't have that logo and don't have the time and the patience to really design something, and they end up putting something that's just awful and doesn't go along with the building. So I think exempt is a harsh word, and again, it should, as Mr. Aliano said, there should be a collaboration. And I think staff will appreciate the fact that it's a national retailer, and national retailers understand, have been through the process anyways. They'll have their A signs and B signs and their C signs. They always go for A. If they don't get A, they'll go for B. But what we don't want to do is limit to C, let's say, as an example or as an analog, because then we are creating a hardship. So as we move on to number 5, again, I think if we're limiting that sort of control to the local and regional guys, I'm comfortable with that. Number 6, that seems fine to me as well. Number 7, again, that seems to be okay in the applicant. You were okay with number 6 and 7 to begin with. I personally also agree that an illuminated sign on the west facade is not going to create hardship for the residential because of the setback and because of already all the lights that are in the parking lot. And personally, they bought a property next to a commercial zone, so I have a little bit of a, I guess, more of a different approach. Is when you buy a property next to commercial, those things are going to happen. There's going to be lights, and as we're trying to basically develop the southern portion of our city, the residential and also other uses that abut commercial, there's always going to be those issues. But I think that's really important for the tax revenues and so forth that are generated, that we keep in mind that people bought those property knowing that they're next to commercial. So I don't have a problem with that. Number 9, I absolutely, this was one that made me think a little bit, because I immediately thought of Subway or one of those restaurants where they always put up their signs on their windows, which is tacky, which is, it just creates a lot of visual, I guess, fluff. That you just, clutter. That it just gets away from the main point. The architect's done such a great job with the building. So I think that is something that could be controlled, and it's not really detrimental to the project. If you just limit it to store hours and the open and close, I think that's certainly a good compromise. And as far as the raceways are concerned, that's something that I think was the biggest issue that's popped up, is how do we address it? The architect brought up a point that maybe there's a backboard that's installed permanently over these windows, and then that has a raceway behind it, and maybe you could choose to use it, and if you don't use it, it just becomes an architectural feature. Now, I'm not sure if that's an option that is even appealable to you, and everyone's shaking their head, so I'm getting a no on that. So that was one.
I think he's saying that I came up with it and not him.
I see. Okay. And so if
He doesn't want the blame for it.
so then I think the only one that we really have an issue with, or something to discuss very briefly, are the raceways, because I think we're all on board with everything else. Items 1 through 9 were discussed. So with the raceways, I think Mr. Aliano raised a good question to the installer, and when you really get that specific of an answer, is what other ways are there to deal with this? And perhaps that's where we start. So if you would, sir, Would you address that question maybe more clearly? Is how else have you seen it, or how do you prefer to address the raceways where they don't have to be removed and relocated every time a tenant changes? Or if the applicant wants to address that, or the architect, amongst yourself, someone come up and give us an idea of what you think is the best idea. And just state your name for the record.
Architect of Latin again. Basically, I think it's not possible for us to come up with another design element because of the multiple tenancy and the possibility of only having one tenant. I mean, if there is a certain backboard, where do you put it? Do you put one large one that spans throughout the whole frontage of the building, or do you put 3 individual ones and give gaps in between? I mean, potentially I can have 2 tenants, I can have 3 tenants, I can have 4 tenants. Where does it stop and where does it begin? I mean, if
One
in the
thing the
future,
suggestion is that it's basically going to take up the space that the raceway would take up, which is the 10 feet. And you're just creating another element that's sort of a backdrop. That's not just a thin little 4x4 that's stuck to the...
architecturally and aesthetically, I don't think it's really designed for that in the building itself.
What material are those panels, that orange panel?
Those are wood panels.
Those are wood, the exterior plywood?
Right. They're not plywood. It's a composite panel,
Okay.
and
They're weatherproof?
they're weatherproof and they're designed for the exterior.
What if those were, literally these dashed items were those same material, and they could be used, or...
Again, it's a design review issue again.
Okay.
I mean, initially, if we designed it that way and in mind that we were going to have this issue with the raceway and whatnot, maybe future developments could be addressed better. But for us, I don't think it's in anybody's best interest, and I don't think in practicality it would work or it would benefit us. I think it would cause more problems and conflict and a distraction rather than just having a raceway and have it die out. I mean, it's been used throughout the city, and there's multiple areas where it's been used. I mean, I don't see a big deal about it, and it's not really, you wouldn't really tell unless you really look at it. And if you're looking for the raceway itself, that's the way I feel. And again, I can have 2 tenants.
Sure.
I don't know how to design it, or I don't think it's originally designed.
I have a question for staff very quickly. And this is the 10th item, so it's the last one. So a lot has been discussed. So at times, I think it's good to focus in on the problem again. What exactly is the issue again with the raceways?
It's a matter of the kind of thing that you're talking about in all cases, for instance with the window signs, to have the raceway concealed behind the wall reduces the visual clutter and essentially, in our view, meets the quality of the level of the center, because it's a high-quality building, and the lens that we looked at the sign program through was about the signage should not diminish the quality of the handsome building.
And so this raceway is literally the J box that we're talking about, because then this raceway has a horizontal piece that will adhere and attach to the J box, and that's where the wires will run.
Right, and the conduit, sometimes the conduit pokes out the ends of that J box and then into the building, depending upon who's
You'd rather see
installing
the
it.
middle, because the city's saying hide it and try to put it in the middle.
Yeah, we're suggesting that it goes behind the exterior wall of the building so that you just get conduit poking through for each individual letter. So it looks like the letter is actually floating on the building. And just to give you a little bit more sense of where we were coming from, because this is a stucco finish at that location, we felt that it would not be a hardship to patch each time. If it were masonry, that might be a different story, but that was our assessment.
Okay, thank you.
One thing that I want to add too is that, there's really the way the building is designed, you have these three lines here. So, all the messiness is going to occur probably somewhere here. if down the road, a few years down the road, you need to repaint, we have some very good, termination points.
Controls are...
Yeah. The color will probably never be perfectly matched, but you could also just paint only the top portion. Because you have a barrier here, you might not be able to see the difference in shade. There's ways to work with that. I think that's something, an advantage of just how the building has been designed. That the holes in the wall made by various tenants as they come in and go. I think it's not just the aesthetic probably for the wrapping, it's also the practicality of it, because you are penetrating the membrane.
Right. You're going through the black paper.
Yeah, you are, but, you have to patch and fill.
Is this something, maybe, are we comfortable with, maybe the applicant working with the urban designer, coming up with some thoughts and ideas of ways that you would prefer to see it that still maintains the waterproof membrane, because I know that's a big deal. Once you penetrate that black paper, especially with stucco, it is hard to really, it's impossible really to repair it unless you get rid of the whole thing and put the paper underneath the existing paper. So maybe that's something they could come up with, some thoughts and ideas on these restways. Because whatever we suggest here might be impacting your waterproofing and your building. So it's maybe best for you guys to discuss that and come up with some thoughts.
I'm okay with that. And just for clarity, you guys can see if you guys turn to page 4 of the Starbucks sign program, you guys would see what typical raceway looks like, so get a better idea of it.
No, but I agree with you on whenever you see the signage with the individual letters and, each one of them kind of popping through, once you change them out a couple times, especially with the smooth stucco, you're never going to get it anywhere close to that. If it has some texture, you might have something to work with, but yeah, once you start drilling that, it starts cracking, and it goes to a word that I can't say. So it's I understand what you're saying, and the raceway is an idea. It's a good way of dealing with it. I just think that aesthetically, it is going to have a bigger presence than what you're anticipating when it's. I mean, if it fills out completely, it's going to look lovely. It's going to be great. But I think if it's shorter, then it's not going to look so good.
And if you have, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And if you end up with multiple holes that are patched up, you could paint them. They might not be the exact same color, but the letters of the various tenants that come and go will probably camouflage that. I mean, I don't think you'll see it. For me, I think I'd rather see a little patch on the wall that might be slightly a shade different.
Believe me, as far as being part of the center, we've done everything we possibly can to make it what it is today, and we've put a lot of thought and effort into it. And it's not our only center. We have multiple centers. And one of our issues was, again, the issue of tenancies, the turnaround of tenancies.
Well, I think we get it, and you've done a very good job with the building. We've been discussing this for almost 2 hours now. It's been a long way. So what I'd like to do is, if there's no more questions, yes, Ms. Wright.
If I may, because this does seem to be a sticking point and we all want to move forward, how about if a condition that states, because it seems like the board is reluctant to eliminate the visible raceways. So perhaps a condition can read that the raceway itself should be sized for that space, the space of the signage as indicated on the drawings for each tenant space. That way, it's an oversized box, but that way the applicant does not have to now at the 11th hour redesign an element of the building, and it can come in with the signage. So that's something for your consideration that may satisfy your concerns.
Okay. But isn't the raceway issue isn't it about the fact that a raceway makes the signage look not integrated or not permanent looking?
Typically, the raceway is about 3 or 4 inches, and then the letters are much bigger. So if the raceway box were essentially oversized to be as big or bigger than the actual letters, then that would actually provide the painted backboard that would be similar or not to the color of the building, and the letters can go on top of that.
So it's kind of like a box sign.
That's what that sign's doing right there, the Panda Express one.
Well, it's not a box sign, it's the box behind the sign. The sign is then elevated from that.
Like this.
Would you be okay with that?
Oversized raceway.
I think that's honestly, I would want the best aesthetic appearance of the building, so believe me, I know what it's going to look good, and that sign is not going to look good because it's going to have big boxes showing, rather than just one thin. Would you rather have one big box or one small box that you're not going to really see?
Have you thought of or considered a raceway on the interior that goes around like the Starbucks center that feeds has the opportunity to feed the wires, and then right in the middle of these, you basically have one exterior waterproof J-box that pops out. And that J-box will have a cover. It'll be painted to match the overall stucco. And if it's used, then of course the cover comes off and it's used. And if it isn't used, it becomes a permanent fixture, and it's a nice square right there.
I think the only problem with that is that the structure of the signage needs to be attached to the building. So that's going to have to be re-drilled back into the building.
Practically,
The weight of the sign will have to be
And
anchored.
if you make the J-box strong enough and you put blocking behind it, can't you adhere to it?
I don't know, they're pretty heavy. Once
They're different sizes and lengths.
10 feet
Just an
across.
idea.
Yeah, no,
Okay, well, that's why I don't think this
That's
is something we're going to be able to resolve this evening. We went through items 1 through 9, there was a consensus overall, so I'm fairly comfortable with that, and I'd like to just propose that, you guys work out number 10. Ms. Reich?
We just would like to take a moment to clarify, because we did hear subtle differences in the opinions of the members. For the illuminated sign on the face of the building that faces the multifamily, we heard 2 for eliminating the illumination and increasing the size of the sign, and 1 to continue to have the illumination. And then regarding the 3-foot or 36-inch logo sign, we just wanted a clarification as to if that is an exception that you'd like to provide for the tenant that's proposed, or if all logo signs you think should be allowed to be 36 inches, because we just wanted a little clarity on that, and that national chains should be not exempt, but subject to review of staff with perhaps more flexibility than regional or local businesses. So I just wanted to make those clarifications before we moved on. Thank you.
So, as far as that discussion is concerned, the illumination, I think I was the only one that said I'm okay with the western sign being illuminated. It's not a big concern of mine because of the fact that, for everything we've already discussed. So, perhaps when we entertain a motion, we could directly deal with some of those clarifications. And
I was okay with it being illuminated,
Yeah,
so.
I can go for that too. The point that you made about the logo, whether it's just this particular case with Starbucks or whether that applies to others, I guess by a logo, a sign itself could be a logo, like Panda Express, that's a logo. So when you look at these letters, I don't think they would be able to achieve that with anything less than 3 feet,
But Panda Express has that panda bear.
And so by logo, are we talking about like an emblem of some sort? Okay. All right.
In the description and in the recommendations, we talk about can signs can be allowed at a particular size for logos. So since it's really the sign program that we want to focus on rather than any particular tenant, we would like direction for what you'd like to see for the sign program.
Then what I would say is, if everybody agrees, tell me if you don't, is I would say make an exception for Starbucks, and then for future logos to be at the plan department's discretion whether they should be 2 or 3, because you'll make the judgment based on what they're proposing. Does that make sense? Because we know what Starbucks is going to look like, we feel like it's in proportion to the building, so we can approve it today, but we don't know, kind of like Panda Express, I don't know what they're going to do, you know?
Okay,
So
thank you.
I think if we leave it up to your discretion, I'm fine with that.
So that would be 2 feet with a flexibility to go to 3 feet with approval from staff.
Yes. And I had a question for the applicant again. See how the crate and barrel sign is done with the reverse channel? And again, that's kind of difficult to judge at this point because crate and barrel might want to do that, but, you know, Panda Express may not just because of the way their letters are. They're always one on top of each other. I've never seen a Panda Express that's linear, you know, Panda Express only one line.
Actually, we had them in our center in Studio City, and they've actually done it on the Raceway, and they prefer Raceway. And all our tenants, which is about 20 of them, in that particular center are on Raceway, including CPK, Jamba Juice, and whatnot.
That's a Raceway in the back, the yellow, isn't it?
That's a Raceway,
Yeah,
correct.
it's fairly a big one, but it's done in such a way where it's more like a slightly angled, it looks like.
That depends on the frontage of the wall itself, because they have more height than width, so that's why they did it probably on a bigger platform. But if their preference is on one line and spread out rather than stackable.
Oh, is that so? Okay.
Right. So that's why you have that, because they have a confined space. They have more space in height than width.
Okay. But if you were to say, let's say that we would agree that this is acceptable, would you think you would be able to find tenants that would do all this signage like that, even Panda Express? In other words,
I highly doubt that, because that's a higher-end tenant. You were talking about Americana, most of them have that particular signage.
The reverse channel instead of the acrylic.
It's obviously like 40% more in cost, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But you can't have all the tenants have a reverse channel. That's why we have, even Starbucks doesn't have that.
How a Raceway, can it be about 3 inches thick, or does it have to be 6 inches?
No, it can be smaller. Depends on, for example, probably the neons are a little bit thicker than the LEDs. Sure.
No, I'm talking about the Raceway itself.
Right.
I mean, if it were a 3-inch Raceway, that means that the back of the letters are much closer to the wall.
Right.
Right.
I think it's
opposed to
possible.
a 6-inch where you got much deeper shadow.
I'll agree to 3 inches. I think that's...
Is it going to limit the size of the letter itself, though?
No.
It's the depth, really, that we're talking
Right.
about.
The thickness.
The
So are we okay with the 6-inch face, then?
I don't know, I still have issues with that, but I don't know how else to come around this. To me, this seems like a universal problem. We're not going to see it just with this project, because every applicant is going to have the same concern. It's not just with this applicant. I mean,
The bigger issue.
yeah, I mean, everybody's going to come and say, I want to use a Raceway because that's more practical. So the city has to determine, whether we go with something that's practical or we just, and not be as nice looking. So, but I don't know if the staff is willing to take on that responsibility to make that judgment. I thought the idea of a program is that you kind of set up the parameters and you don't go back on it,
And that's why I think with the national retailers, we want to provide them that flexibility. So I'm looking at the chairs, and the back of the chairs, it's probably about 20 inches. So if you have a 2 foot by 2 foot logo, and I'm driving by this at 35 miles per hour, I don't know, 2 foot by 2 foot might be small.
Yeah.
So, we might need to make it a little bigger or let them have that flexibility. So I'm absolutely okay with, staff having that dialogue. It just, we should have flexibility for the national guys. I think that's a given.
Could we draft another version of what you mentioned, which is that if a Raceway is proposed, to be less visible rather than trying to make an element out of it. Because a 3-inch depth traceway is not as bad as a 6-inch depth, because then you...
If the applicant and our signage contractor says that 3-inch depth is typical, and I believe it is, they tend to be thinner than they are wide. So we could put in the condition 3-inch depth maximum, and we may write something to give some discretion for a particular technical problem that can be demonstrated, for instance. And we can write to minimize the raceway as much as possible, paint it to match the building, and then we have a guideline that maybe you're happy with.
And not extend past the ends of the sign, obviously.
Right. We can state that as well in the condition.
What do you mean by not extend out beyond the sign?
Well, if it's an 8-foot raceway, we don't want the sign to be 6 feet. So you have 3,
Well, what if the sign, the business is called ABC?
That's the thing. I mean,
You can't, how do you restrict it?
right, they have to.
Typically, the raceways are within the signage.
But they're saying that they're going to put one 10-foot one, and whatever tenant happens to come in, you put up your sign after that.
I think they were offering that as a possibility.
No, that's what you're saying, right?
I think very quickly, Mr. Marcucci, if you would come up for 30 seconds, because I know you've been wanting to come up, address this issue very quickly, and let us know what's the best way to approach this.
Point of clarification. You gentlemen know that the sign area is limited to what the code will allow on your frontage. So if somebody chooses to put a 9 square feet logo, which let's say if it says square, not 3 by 3, he will end up with, let's say, on this with a 3 square feet of lettering. They're not going to do that. It has to be proportional. So if a tenant takes one bay, they might end up with an 18-inch logo or a 24-inch logo. So you really, I mean, they have a limit. They cannot go over.
So what about the raceway? I mean, I think we're talking
and the raceway, the technology is advancing every day. Nowadays, they're using LEDs, and they don't require this hefty connections that come from neon tubes and all the assembly that goes behind it. So just a simple wiring that goes through a raceway. Raceways could be a lot narrower than what they are. I don't know what they are nowadays, but every day they're improving. So
How wide is your individual storefront from control joint to control joint?
From control, I think that opening is 12 feet.
12 feet. And how wide of a raceway do you think is appropriate?
The raceway.
Here's calling out for 10.
The raceway should match 10 feet. The raceway should match the length of the letter that takes the signage. It should not. I mean, it should not go beyond the letterings.
So it's going to be a new raceway is going to put in for every new sign that goes in?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yes. It's the tenant's responsibility to put their own raceway. It's not the landlord. The landlord is restricting the tenant where to put them.
Aren't they going to then pierce through the waterproofing every time?
No. I mean, you already have a penetration that they're going to use for.
Very good.
Mhm.
that's the beauty of the raceway. They penetrate only once, and then you have
That makes sense.
a box.
So the raceway is anchored only in the middle then? Is that what you're
It's
saying?
feed through the middle or one end of it, and it's anchored at one or two or three locations. If it's a longer one, let's say if it's 20 feet, obviously you cannot have it in 2 spots. But if it's a 10-feet raceway, three points may be enough to hold it in place.
The one in the middle, 2 at the ends?
Yes.
Which means that if it gets shorter, then you're going to have to patch everything up again?
Right. And the raceway basically carries the entire lettering, which is...
Doesn't that defeat the
anchored.
purpose of having the raceway?
That's what I'm saying.
What's that to do that?
Anyways.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think we've beat that one to death. I think we have a very nice consensus on the first 9 items, which was, I think, interesting because it allows us to basically pave the way for future discussions on signage. So I think that was very beneficial for us to take this time, even though it was very long-winded for the applicant. But now we have a consensus as to what staff thinks is appropriate, and we had some good dialogues as to what the applicants think are marketable with the national tenants and retailers and so forth. So I think the last one is number 10. We've certainly explored some ideas with some of the newer technologies that's coming out. The architect might be coming back and working with the urban designer with these raceways and perhaps coming up with a solution that uses newer technology and is lighter in weight and could adhere to the building in such a way that could be adjusted with time.
Right. If they're willing to replace the raceway for the length of the sign at each point, I'm okay with the way it is then. I mean, I'm okay with the raceway then.
Yeah.
They have to replace the raceway if a smaller
And
sign
they'll
comes
patch up
in.
and do the work if they want.
Then you still have the discoloration behind, you know.
I think the big issue was the confusion was we were trying to alleviate the fact that repatching, but then we did a whole circular
But if they're okay with repatching, then
issue.
there's no issue.
Right, so there's no issue, I guess. So then do we want to entertain a motion specifically addressing some of the issues that Ms. Reich raised as well with the lidded sign on the western side, with the raceway issue, and the third one, I forget what it was.
That would be, I think what we so far have is that logos will be limited to 2 feet typically, and with staff approval can go to a maximum of 3 feet.
That's the only, what about
And
the other?
and then I think you already discussed the illumination piece
Which
that
we're okay
you
with.
all seem to be okay with,
And the
so.
third item is though,
The national,
Yes, and I got nods for that the national retailers should have more flexibility than regional and local chains, but they will be approved by staff on a case-by-case basis.
does that cover number 5 as well?
which is eliminate
color.
color ranges
That is a
that
color
clash
range.
with the color of the two
That
buildings.
should be at the discretion of the planning department as well, I think.
So are you okay with that condition number 5 as written, per planning
it
staff
should-
approval?
Yeah, it should be per staff approval based on whatever the national logo is. You have to make that judgment that it's appropriate.
Okay.
Because you may find some signs that will clash with the color, but you may not have a choice because of the logo being.
And it might
Right.
be good for the center and the neighborhood.
Right.
Right.
So that was the other, and then I think we, colors, yeah, that's okay. Letters form shall be reviewed by.
Number
7
9,
is
we're
good.
adding the hours portion of it, right?
We are, yes.
Yeah. And then number 10 is really the bigger one, which was saying as long as the raceway is at least a maximum of 3 inches and is concealed behind the sign, so that the sign feels like it's much closer to the surface, then we are leaving it up to plan discretion to make sure that it's designed and it's to your
And it's
approval.
confined within the lettering.
Fine with the letters.
I think we have a clarity on that, and we'll put these conditions in the minutes when they come forward, and you'll get to see them once more.
All right. Well, I would like to move to approve the signage program based on, with the comments that we made and conditions.
Is there a second?
I second.
This will be roll call. Mr. Aliano?
Yes.
Mr. Yu?
Yes.
Chairman Simonian?
Yes.
Approval on a 3-0 vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do we want to take a quick 5-minute recess before we go over the rest of the changes? All right, let's take a 5-minute recess.
Mr. Simonian.
Oh, we're back? Very good. Welcome back to Design Review Board 1. Our next item on the agenda is oral communications, and I don't have any cards right now for oral communications, so I believe we're going to move along to item number 6, which is staff and board business discussions and so forth, and more specifically, the Design Review Board orientation discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Ms. Reich, have her introduce the new process and generally go over what the changes have been from the old Design Review Board process to the new Design Review Board process. And although there is only 3 of us today of the 5, the other 2 board members, staff is going to make an attempt to get them to come next week for Design Review Board 2's meeting to get caught up. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Ms. Reich and for her to go over all the changes.
Thank you, Chair Simonian. Since everything we do in Planning Department is a team effort, we have a good portion of our team to be talking with you about these changes, and I'd like to pass the mic to Director of Planning Hassan Haghani to make some introductions, and we have also Tim Foy to share in the remarks today, which we think will be more of a discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Design Review Board. This is simply to get an orientation primarily for the members of the public and a lot of our applicants, but also for some members of the Design Review Boards. As you know, the City Council went through a 1 year of highly engaged exercise in reviewing the design review process and directing staff to actually implement their wishes in terms of how they would like us to change the design review process. And along with that, there were some changes in the code and a great deal of changes in the way we do design review as opposed to how we used to do design review. And over the last 2 to 3 months, we have really started implementing piece by piece some of the direction that the City Council gave us, and we're still developing that process. But we thought it would be a good idea to, starting this week, to come and have some sort of an orientation of the new process to better describe what the staff's new roles are and how we are going to interact with the applicants, and then how we're going to present our analysis to the Design Review Board, how those pieces are supposed to get together and make a complete design review process. And this is particularly good with some of the applicants who have been our frequent applicants for many years, and they're not used to it. Sometimes they're a little bit surprised by the way that we do things. They say, I've been doing this for 20 years and this has never been the case. We have to explain it again and again. Hopefully we'll be able to clarify a lot of these new requirements and why we're doing the way we're doing things. And then as we hear more from you, we can hopefully learn how to even make the process smoother from your standpoint. Thank you very much.
So we've broke today's agenda into a few different sections, and perhaps for purposes of moving things along, we can talk about each section and then we'll present to you the items very briefly, and then we can have a discussion about each section and then move on. So I'd like Mr. Foy to review the ordinance changes. I think you've all been provided with copies of the language, so he can walk us through that portion. Thank you.
Yes, this is the recent Design Review Board revisions that were adopted by the City Council, I believe in May, and March, and became effective in April. And there's one provision which kind of became effective in May. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we have already discussed these with the board, and but this would be a good time after you've had some months of implementing them to give us feedback perhaps on our practices. But these are already adopted by the City Council. The number of times, letter A, there is a number of times an item can appear before the board, and it is essentially you can have two cracks at final review. There can be preliminary review, but when it comes to final review, the board must take when it returns for a second review of final review, the board must make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny. There's no returning for redesign for a third final review. And that's really the important point to know about that. Story pole requirements. This was debated long and hard before the City Council, and essentially story poles, or a temporary frame which shows the outlines of a proposed development in the hillside zones, the ROS and R1R. Whenever a building is a completely new building, regardless of its size, story poles are required, even if it's only one story, if it's a completely new building. If the project before you is an addition to an existing building, then story poles are absolutely required only if there is a second-story addition. Staff has some discretion otherwise with an addition to an existing building, even if it's only one story. We do have the discretion to require it, and of course the board can ask for it at any time as well. But it's an absolute requirement when there's an addition to an existing building which involves a second story in the hillside zones.
Even if we don't make it clear, it's an automatic thing that the applicant has to do.
Exactly.
Without us saying anything.
Right. Exactly. Without us saying anything. I mean, we will say something, of course, but it's in the code. It's a requirement in some cases. In the R1 zones, it may be required or it is required. Let me just check on that. Oh, is that okay? The director knows what he has discretion over. It's at the director's discretion. Again, for a second-story addition to an existing house. And again, in other cases, the board, if you feel it's necessary, you may ask for it at any time in your review. Privacy provisions. This one is kind of complicated, and it has to do with protecting privacy in existing dwelling units. It's not about protecting the privacy of people inside of a new dwelling unit. But what we want to do is protect the people in existing buildings from the view of those rooms in the new house where people are going to be spending most of their time, from the living room of the new house, from the dining room of the new house, the libraries and dens. Now, though in new buildings, typically, when lots are of equal elevation, those what we call areas of primary living areas, like the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, where you spend your time, they'll tend to be on the first floor. So privacy impacts will be minimized. Second floor tends to be often bedrooms and bathrooms, where people don't spend a lot of time, and the code calls out that the view from those rooms into existing houses is not what is meant by privacy protection. It's only protection of your privacy from the rooms of the new house where people spend most of their time. Okay. Now, of course, obviously, when there's elevation changes between properties, all those, even if it's a first floor living room, it could still have great impacts. So again, the privacy provisions, it protects existing development from views of the primary living areas of the new development. In addition, it is not meant to reduce the size of a house. It is not meant to eliminate a reasonable number of windows in the new house. If someone does have a primary living area which might have a privacy impact on an existing neighbor, the board should see if you could rearrange the house, rearrange the floor plan a little bit. You could perhaps suggest different placement of windows, but it is not meant to promote new houses that have solid walls without any windows, that sort of thing. Okay? The definition of neighborhood, this has to do with concept of compatibility, and compatibility to what? And you will see the very last page of the handout that I gave you, 30.47.075. I've circled letter C. And the new language are the second and third sentences, that the primary emphasis on compatibility, about compatibility, the primary emphasis on what constitutes a neighborhood should be given to the existing development pattern within 300 feet, and special attention should be placed on ensuring a positive design relationship with adjacent development and development on the block in which the project is located. That is to say, on your block face, and adjacent development, meaning those behind you touching you in the back, but adjacent in the back. So that's what's meant by that. And then our last topic here is, the elimination of alternative assessment panel and the extension of the appeal period to 15 days. As you know, for projects which were received after this ordinance became effective, appeals from the Design Review Board will go straight to City Council. And the extension of the appeal period from 7 days to 15 days matches that of most of our other permits.
Very
So
good.
that concludes staff's presentation on this first part. If you have any questions or any feedback on how it's going so far.
Well, it's certainly a lot of new information, and it's very helpful to go over this. And so what staff recommended was to really focus in on each one of these sections. So staff will go through, for instance, section number 1's item A to E, and then we could opine on it and ask some questions, so that way we keep the discussion moving forward and try to be as efficient as possible. We do have one speaker, Saka Marakusi, who's would like to speak on section 1 specifically. So instead of having him wait around for the remainder of the evening, I think it's a good time for you to come up and place your thoughts, state your thoughts, and so forth, and then we'll opine on and ask questions on item 1 to staff as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairs and members of the board and staff. My name is Sako Marcusi. My primary issue is with story poles. I brought my concerns to the City Council when it was publicly heard, and I submitted my reasoning. And now that I do design projects, homes, and the more intricate the design is, the more broken roof lines, the more articulation in a building, the more of these story poles you have. Now, if it's on a bare land, just with no buildings, well, it's not that big of an issue, but when you're doing a remodeling where there's an existing home and you're adding a second story, I think that should be left to the discretion of the board, and staff should have some reasonableness in this to whether or not you really need to have story poles, especially looking around your neighborhood, adjacent buildings, and this thing should weigh in whether or not you should put story poles. Now, I have a house that will be coming before maybe this board or the next board, and I might end up with, I have over 12 hips in this building, and equal amount of valleys and ridges. So, each point, each ridge takes 2 poles. Each hip takes a third pole. Each valley takes a third pole. So I will end up with maybe 25, 30 poles on a top of a single-story building. God knows how they're going to support these on top of this building. And the amount of liability that one needs to carry, and the owner's concerned that somebody is putting a second story on top of temporary thing on top of a building, which might damage the roof, and try to string all the tops of these together to, for what? To show, let's say, in this case, I'm case specific. I have 2-story buildings on either side of this project, yet the ordinance is telling me to put story poles on top of this single-story home to show that it's not going to be intrusive. You can just go in front of that building and you can see that really you're not going to be impacting the neighbors because there are 2 stories all along that block. So I think it's a futile effort, which the owner might be spending tens of thousands of dollars, and yet it will come before you, and you might agree with the design or not, and then he will probably have to go back and adjust the poles, and again spend money and time. And so this is really, if you allow me a few more seconds, this is really a concern that I have on this, I brought this before the council, but in practicality, I'm not sure if you had one project yet that has gone through this, but I think you will find out that it's going to be very difficult for both the applicants and the owners. And one last thing on...
If you could wrap it up quickly.
Okay, I'm
30
done.
seconds or less.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Marcucci. And I certainly remember your conversations with City Council. I heard them and was present as well, or was watching it on TV. So we'll take those into consideration as well and discuss them. And so what I think is appropriate at this point in time is for us to address staff with some questions that we might have on items 1A through E. And again, in a summary, staff mentioned that the project really could come before us twice, and that's a little different than before. And story pole requirements, as has been stated, the privacy issues, we've spoke about that in great length. And again, what I'm hearing from Mr. Foy is the following, is that there's the primary spaces, such as the living spaces, which is the living room and the dining room and the kitchen and the family room, and that's where a majority of time is spent in a dwelling. And that is what is at issue here. So when there's an existing home next door, we're trying to prevent this new development from infringing on the privacy of the next door from these primary spaces. So it does not include the bedrooms, does not include these secondary spaces, which very little amount of time is spent, or balconies as well. But I wanted to make sure on that balcony portion, because it does come up front of us quite a bit, where we do have balconies on the second floor. So I wanted to get some clarification from Mr. Foy, if we could, on the balcony issue.
Yes, it is true that some balconies are included in what we're calling primary living areas here, and those are balconies which are greater than 25 square feet. So just a little, kind of what they call Juliet-type balconies, where you can just put a few potted plants or something, wouldn't count. But 25 square feet, which is anything larger than 5 by 5, would count as a primary living area.
I see. And if we have a situation, we have a building, and we have a balcony that runs along the second floor, and the bedrooms come off of this balcony, and there's an end to this balcony, is the intent to pretty much have a solid ending to that balcony? So as you're standing at the balcony looking down, you see a solid 4-foot wall, let's say, at the end, as opposed to a railing. Will that suffice? Or is the idea to eliminate that balcony altogether?
No, it's not to eliminate the balcony altogether. I think that what you've described is a very possible solution to a balcony, depending on where it's placed on a building.
Can landscaping be used to screen views?
Landscaping has kind of a temporary nature, so that may not really be a permanent solution.
Cypress? No? Anybody? Okay.
That was actually one of the issues that was discussed as an alternative, and after much discussion, the conclusion was that landscaping should not be used as a way to eliminate the loss of privacy as a result of the location and the programming of the balconies or the primary living space.
Sir Gownie, I have another question as it pertains to these view matters. Assuming, and I believe it's the right forum to bring it up because this board is going to be assessing these situations going forward. Assuming we have a design that we, as a board, think is compatible and is well designed, and assuming we have a case where there's really no opposition, and the next door neighbor has reviewed the drawings and thinks it's a good design as well. However, this design, this proposed design, has a balcony that is overlooking, or has even more to the point, a primary space that's overlooking. Are we as a board mandated to say something about that matter and have it redesigned, or as long as there's no objections because it's done right, it's done tastefully, because it's been integrated, it's got all the right features, we just basically leave it up to the public to collaborate on that matter.
I think the discussion before the council focused on the fact that, we do live in kind of a major urbanized area here, and that there have to be some limitations on what your expectations of privacy can be when you're in a row of 50-foot wide lots or most anywhere in Glendale. And really the way the code reads is that we shall not unreasonably impact the privacy of other buildings and outdoor space. So if you think that if there is a balcony or a primary living area which might have a view, but it's not an unreasonable intrusion on the privacy of the next door neighbor for whatever reason, change in topography or placement of the buildings on the lot, then no, you are absolutely not required to, start denying things just because there's some theoretical possible loss of privacy.
But if I may add, but you are required to take a look and see if there is an unreasonable encroachment. So you still have to take a look at that. And then if you decide that it is not unreasonable, then you can move forward.
Okay. Do we have any other questions on this matter?
Well, I liked item B, the story pole. I know that's part of the code, and I will have to deal with it. I just not sure how effective story poles will be. And I've always thought that they're there, and because he said it as well, is that a huge liability. They're going to cost owners a lot of money to put those things up. So. But it's already in the book, so we have to deal with it. And we have no leeway on new buildings, but we do have some discretion on existing buildings that are not 2 stories, correct?
Yes, and I should mention also that the very last sentence of this section, it's page 229 of the handout here that describes story pole requirements, that we might approve some other method of showing the project proposal, which aids in envisioning the project proposal, other than story poles. There was some debate when we were discussing this.
Even in an R1R?
I'm sorry?
Even in an R1R?
Right. I mean, this tended to go towards the question of would computer modeling suffice. I mean, there was some debate among the architects even. Some people said it wouldn't, but we do have, a provision for someone to propose an alternative method of helping everyone envision what the new project is going to look like, which is, of course, the heart of this.
If I may ask, the story polling, is that primarily intended for the public to get an idea of what the impact is, or is it really for the board? I suspect it's for the public.
It is. Our understanding was that it was primarily for the public because Mr. Marcucci was nice enough to come to some of the council meetings, but we met with many builders and architects prior, and several folks actually gave a similar message to us, and we passed that on to the city council, that there are builders and architects who do not think that story poles are necessarily the only way to show the impact on the surrounding community, and there are other means to do so. However, I think the members of the public who came made it very clear that for them the best method was to have the actual physical frames on the location so they can visualize it better, visualize the proposal better. And in the end, it came down to the language that you see in front of you, and the City Council really discussed that back and forth a lot as well. And they discussed the financial burden that it might add to the applicant, and et cetera. And in the end, they decided that overall this was the best way to approach this. And I believe it was for the sake of the neighborhood residents.
And Mr. Ogoni, I think what is also important is in the middle of that paragraph that directly deals with story poles, in that perhaps it doesn't have to cover every single ridge, every single valley, every single corner, if there's a whole bunch of articulations in a building. And that's something that at least I think is more practical, because when you do have good architecture, you tend to have a lot of those nuances in the design. So, the way at least it's been presented is, the major ridgeline and so forth. So maybe we could elaborate on that, just so people that are in the pipeline could start thinking ahead and could start understanding what we mean by it. And frankly, it could clarify our understanding as well.
Yeah, our sense from the council and from the community is that the concern is overall size and relationship to adjacent buildings. So to that end, we really don't want to discourage articulation in the buildings by mandating something that would be too onerous and onerous beyond its purpose. And that's why the language in the code talks about all ridge lines, because there needs to be some definition of what the volume would be, only perhaps not every tiny and subtle variation of that. So we would be happy to work with the applicants. We often work with the applicants prior to the submittal being complete to give a better sense, case by case, of what is needed. But really, it's the primary volume of the proposal that's really concerned.
And I think that's very important because, and I quote, it says, rigid wood posts or other study and rigid material at all corners of the structure and at either end of the proposed ridge line. So what we're talking about is taking the highest ridge line, confining it at that point, defining what that is, and at least the building corners. And and I'm bringing this up because I don't want there to be this perception from perhaps the public or people watching or whatnot that this thing is going to be 100% accurate model replication of exactly what the home is going to look like, because you're going to end up basically putting many holes in an existing roof of a home and trying to do this and try to keep it up. God forbid it's in the October to April rainy season, and then you have the winds and all that. It could be a disaster. So again, this is just to show the major outline of the building, which is the ridge line and the corners.
And I've seen it in some municipalities. I've seen it where the actual ridges and valleys are done with cables or some kind of a colored rope. So you have sticks that stick all of them, they're fully braced, and then you connect these points with cables of some sort. I think that seems a reasonable and safe way to do it, because then you have the vertical ones that are braced. That are probably, it's the ones that are hanging up in the air that will be a huge problem, I think, unless you. So if that's the intent, then.
And that's how the code is written as well.
Try to make it easier. Okay.
I don't know, that still worries me a lot.
It does. It worries me as well.
Because I know I've seen some jurisdictions like Malibu and some of the beach communities, they spell out specifically, they have to be 2x4s, they have to be this or that, and I know we don't want to get into that, but by not prescribing something like that, it almost opens it up so that what if somebody puts up these, 2x2 frames that might stand well for like a couple of weeks, and then windstorm will come up and it'll fall on somebody, and it's really worrisome, because it's not something that's, it's not going to be checked by, the inspectors or anything like that to make sure that it's rigid enough. You put another 2x4 here or that.
It has to stay up, I think, throughout the whole process.
Yeah, it's going to be, months and months, so.
Who is responsible? Is the city attorney addressed this? The
homeowner.
An accident, is the city expecting the homeowner to take full liability for something like that, or how is that?
That's a legal question, and we, since the city attorney is not here.
Okay.
That means the homeowner.
All right.
Okay.
And I agree with you. It's there, and we have to abide by it, but I don't agree with it as well. And so
I think you're sensing a general mood of all the questions that has risen in the past and all the questions that are going to continue to come up on this matter. It's certainly something that we don't have any jurisdiction over. I think what what we could achieve this evening is some practical direction, at least to the architectural engineering community and also the homeowners, as to what are the expectations and what are the new rules. And at least we're educating the public of what needs to occur based on these new procedures. And once we start educating the public, then the process will be implemented, and over time, one could tell what is an appropriate policy and what isn't, and what is causing more of a heartache and hardship than what was intended. So
I would maybe just urge the planning department to use this sort of, where we do have a choice of using it or not, to use it on when you really need to use it, and so try to limit that. So that's it.
Okay, then, moving on to Section 2, role and responsibilities of staff. There are many policies, essentially, that the council has asked us to implement that are not inscribed in the ordinance that we're working through, and we've been working through with your assistance as well. Regarding our role vis-a-vis the applicants, we look at all our applicants as clients that we are serving, and we try to give them the best possible service throughout this process. So providing meetings with them to give them an indication of what we anticipate the board might say, give them information that we're familiar with regarding the physical components of the community and the compatibility, of course always using our professional judgment, but taking our cues from the what we've heard from the community and what we've heard from you. And that's the benefit to having many of us consistently in the meetings, interacting with you, so we get a very good sense of what you're looking for. And you know, we don't have a crystal ball. We always tell our applicants that, but we do our best to predict what the reactions are and give them guidance that will be helpful to them in moving the project through. So we do our best even before an application comes to us fully submitted. We don't want our applicants and owners going through undue expense and then having to change their project. So this is actually part of our campaign to get the word out that we're here to help the applicants, and we'll be willing to meet with them before there's a complete application submitted. We encourage that interaction. We do our best to assign a planner to that project prior to the submission, so that we have a continuity of service, and that the planning team that helps the project and facilitates the project in moving forward is consistent throughout that project. So we've been implementing that. We have heard some positive comments about that. Perhaps you have heard some comments as well. That would be interesting to know how that's working from your point of view and from our applicants' point of view. We try not to make this an infinitely long process. Our goal is to do additional work up front that hadn't been done previously, and I think what we have been seeing is that it may eliminate additional hearings in front of you. So overall, we anticipate our working with the applicants does shorten the amount of overall time spent processing their entitlements. So then what we try to do, we do our best to report to you in the staff report. We believe that is our best way of communicating to you and communicating to the public the merits and potential deficiencies of the project. So what we try to do within our reports, and we've developed templates to our reports that coincide with the adopted design guidelines, so that all of the points that we heard from the community in adopting the guidelines are addressed, the substantial points, that is, addressed in the staff reports. And typically, the most important points are highlighted in the separate sections. What we try to do is a brief description, provide analysis, and then assessment of the proposal. What we started to do is communicate to the board what interactions may have happened, not specifically, but what, if we see a positive change that's happened over the course of the project, of our interaction with the applicant, we think that's important information for the board to have in assessing the project themselves. So, and then anything that we've discussed that hasn't come to, say, some agreement between staff and the applicant, we will reflect in the report and also in the recommendations. And again, we always use our professionalism, but we try to defer to what we've heard from the boards in reacting to the applications using the design guidelines and best practices of urban design and architecture. So the council has asked for us to provide for you a recommendation, and often we use our reports to help frame the most important issues. That helps for the board to focus in your work more strategically, we think, on the most important issues of the project. And to that end, with the recommendations, we do our best, and we've started to implement this change. We do our best to draft what we're referring to as a record of decision, so that in the future, when we look back on this approval, and as part of the process of constructing a project, there's really always unintended changes that happen as just the natural part of the construction process. So that if there is a change to something that the applicant is hoping to make for any variety of reasons that is not specifically addressed in the conditions, the planner and the team that's administering the project during plan check and during construction approvals and so forth can look at that record of decision and see essentially what's the essential pieces that have been important to the board in approving the project, and then of course use our best judgment in approving any changes. And insofar as there may be a misunderstanding or for clarification that's needed of the conditions that you've made, we will do our best to contact the chair, and after, of course, viewing the tape and our recollections and our notes and so forth, if we still have confusion, we will contact the chair to get a sense if we have some confusion.
If I may add something. This is perhaps one of the areas that's the most fresh and surprising to many applicants, because you might remember, those of you who have been on the design review board in the past, and those of you who weren't and you watched it, you might have seen that projects came at different places. Some projects really would come and maybe would not take more than 1 or 2 meetings before you could actually come to a decision and move forward. But some projects would sometimes take several meetings. And literally, the design review board meeting would be used as a design studio where you would work with the applicant and their architect sometimes through several meetings to actually improve the design to one that would be acceptable or not. And one of the reasons that the City Council directed staff to actually write staff reports, very clearly identifying what staff's recommendations are, and for what reason staff is making those recommendations, is to give the chance, now that the applicants have two shots to have their proposal reviewed by you, to give the applicants the chance to work out those details with staff prior to coming to you, and to have the design ideas reflected in staff report. So there's a record of it prior to the meeting. Everybody knows what that is, including the applicant and the neighborhood. If there sometimes, from time to time, there's a contentious situation there. So in those situations, especially, there is a record that explains what the analysis is and why we have to have these recommendations. This has been a surprise to some of our applicants, and that is especially because in the past, the applicant would come submit their application, and we would put it on the board, and we would schedule it, and the staff might or might not say anything about this. We might give a very brief presentation. Now the case is different because we need to make a recommendation, and staff needs to tell the applicant, this is pretty much how we feel about this, and if you need a recommendation for approval, or these are some of the ideas that we think would be acceptable to the Design Review Board. And that's a process that we're working on at this point to help the applicant, and what Stephanie was referring to as we're trying to help and serve the applicants. We try to help and serve them so that when they come to you, they're prepared, and the design is in a state that hopefully we're a lot closer to recommending approval than not. That way, we will reduce the number of the meetings and the length of the meetings for everyone. That is really the goal of this, and it's taking some time, but we're working through this.
I like to say that this aspect of the presentation, in terms of what the staff's responsibilities are, I have a lot to say about it, and a very positive thing to say about it. I think it's making our job a lot easier, and I can see that the quality of the project is much better. Unfortunately, the economy is such that we're not seeing as many projects as before, but you can really see that this is having a good effect on the presentations and what we see here. And I really like the item C, on number 2C, where there's definitely a clarity there that the staff needs to tell us what they think, because your opinion makes a difference in what we decide. Because if you feel like the project is not a good project, but the applicant decided to move forward anyways, at least we know where you stand, and that gives us even more. So I think that's a good thing. So I'd like to congratulate the Plan Department, especially Ms. Reich, for all the great efforts.
Thank you. That's really very generous of you. Really, the planners do most of the heavy lifting here and work very closely with the applicants, too. It's really quite a team effort.
I think that you're right. The way it's changed and the way we're working with more of the applicants before they come to us, I think it's very good. But I like the fact that it's sort of hand in hand with the fact that we're changing it from the second review, and you have an option of doing one or two things after the second review. But that goes very well with the fact that they are working with the planners beforehand, because if one came without the other, I think it'd be a big mess. And so I think that's very good. And I just wanted to add one thing, and maybe that's something that's already being done, but I was wondering, when somebody brings in the application up front, is there ever a log of events that happen sort of in the process of them going from applying to getting to the Design Review Board? And the only reason I ask is because, people come here and they're like, well, I've been at this for 6 months now, and so on and so on. And so, and I'm sure part of that is, of course, the applicant's responsibility to get a timely manner to return things and those kinds of things. But, we've had a couple of cases where maybe they're falling through the cracks a little bit, and so they have taken 6 months to do it. But to sort of get a sense for how long projects are taking to get to Design Review Board, and maybe to even have a better idea of why it's taken them 6 months while others have taken 2 months. And so maybe to sort of, defend yourself a little bit too with that.
Well, that's an interesting question. We, of course, always know when a project has come in to us, and there is a formal communication with an applicant when they have been deemed complete, which is when our clock, essentially our legal clock, starts running, because there needs to be a decision made by state law within a certain time frame. And now, just to clarify a point, the the story pole requirements or temporary frame, where that is required, the application will not be deemed complete until those are constructed and verified that those are constructed. We do our best to note, of course, when we meet with the applicant and what discussions occur. I guess, as you mentioned, some of the difficulty is that different applicants have different timeframes that they're operating under, and so we never really know when an applicant is going to come back to us and say they want to move forward, because of course we wouldn't meet with an applicant and they say, okay, we will go ahead and make these revisions. We wouldn't want to move them forward to the review until they ask us to.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is more of a technical thing of just January 12th they came in and I talked to them. January 14th
I understood your question. I think there are a couple of things I need to say about that. What Ms. Reich was just talking about is that from the time that an application is actually officially submitted, yes, we do have an official record because now we have a case. But sometimes when the applicants are saying we've been at it for 6 months, they're not really necessarily talking about since they submitted their application. What is happening typically right now is that people come and meet with our staff, and they have a proposal. They have maybe sketched something out, and they get a number of comments from us. This is all happening prior to them actually submitting an application. And typically, most applicants, if there is an opportunity, they would like to get an exemption from the Design Review Board review. And for cases that are clearly not going to be even within that category, that's different. But from time to time, we get an applicant who's trying to see if there is a way that they could get an exemption, and then that goes through several dialogues before they actually submit an application. And from time to time, in the other cases where the application is large and clearly it's not going to be an exemption application, those might take 6 months before we actually see an official application. So we keep track really unofficially of the meetings that we've had. We know what we have told the applicant and their designer, what needs to take place, but we don't keep an official record of it. This is part of the service we provide. And it is true, sometimes it takes that long.
I guess since you do have all those records, have you noticed that the applications are taking longer or shorter time to get to the board?
It's really hard, I think, to tell at this point because we have implemented the changes really starting in February and March and been implementing many changes at one time. Excuse me. So we are going to be tracking that, keeping track of our approval rating, so that we can then report back to you and to City Council what the effect of the overall policies have on our timeframes.
Okay.
I also...
Tim wanted to say something.
And if I may, I would just say, hiring additional personnel in urban design, in the person of Ms. Reich here, has allowed the board sometimes to just defer final decisions, final, tuning of a project, to the applicant working directly with staff, instead of saying, well, come back to us again, and then it's a matter of the person getting in line, getting on the schedule, there's an opening, possible renoticing if that's needed. So that has helped on the, the finishing end.
It's very true.
And in addition, just the idea of people saying that they've been at things for 6 months. I mean, I'll admit that we are, we have a lot of cases going through here. Planners have a lot of different projects. But we've had a restructuring of our department at the impetus of Hassan, mostly, in which the planners who are working on design review cases are broken into smaller teams, and we have more people who are overseeing them with regularity to talk about how their caseload is going and helping them to solve problems. And I really want to recognize these are the 3 senior planners, Brad Collin, Roger Kiesel, and Vinny Zematitis, who have taken on a lot of extra duties. And in my view, it's paying off in helping to keep projects moving and find out where people are getting stuck.
And I also wanted to emphasize item 2D, because I do think it is quite important. It's something that was discussed quite a bit throughout the whole process with City Council, and really the public has requested the fact that there's some sort of a record of decision, and we don't want to call them findings. They're really not findings, because this is not a zoning administrator case, it's not a CUP case, it's not a variance case, where we have to have those findings. This is Design Review Board, which is very different. Design Review Board is about buildings, and it's about design, and it's a little more subjective as opposed to verbal. And but what has been implemented, and as you might have noticed in the last few times, is there's a record of decision that's read, and it's usually read at the end. So while we go through the case, the conditions are put forth, there's a motion made, it's seconded, and then at some point the case planner goes through this record of decision. I think it's important for us to understand that although it happens at the last point of a hearing on a specific case, it's probably one of the most important things that's discussed, because it's a way we're recording our thoughts in a verbal manner as to what was really important about it and how we found it compatible with the neighborhood, for instance, how we basically thought the design was the right fit, or whatever the issue might be, whether it's a very small addition to a ground-up project. That record of decision is something that formally gets put forward and could formally get appealed, and upon an appeal it becomes the basis for a lot of discussions to take place. And so I think it's very important for us to realize that staff does their best to put a record of decision forward. I've asked last time around, because it's so new, that they actually break it up into 1, 2, 3, and 4, not just a paragraph, because once it's broken up, it's easier for us to comprehend it and understand it. And we should make it a point to make them repeat it if we have some issues or concerns, or not even issues or concerns, but just questions. And it's really important that we pick the right words to really clearly illustrate what our intentions were. And because this becomes a record of decision, and again, in an appeal, because there's only 2 shots that they have, and if it does move forward, it becomes the basis of the appellant really coming forward with their thoughts and ideas as to why the project didn't meet the guidelines. Because that's what it's really all about, is designing within the guidelines, and we're trying to approve projects within the guidelines. So I thought that was important for us to focus in on it, and that we take our time to think about those words. And they'll come up again in the minutes as well. So it might be one of the most important things to look at in the minutes, to make sure that, in hindsight, now that we've had some time to discuss it and think about it, it's the right words and the right verbiage.
With regard to the record of decision, Ms. Reich actually started alluding to this and started talking about this. So one thing that will come up from time to time, as you know, is that the project is built after approval slightly different, and sometimes very different than what you approved. And then at that point, staff often has to sign off whether or not this is exempted from another review by the Design Review Board, to see if this was within the spirit of the decision that you made and the record that we have. So from time to time, it's really clear, and we know exactly that this is completely deviating, and it's very clear that we need to bring it back to you, the case. But once in a while, it's in the gray area, and as Stephanie mentioned, we're confirming that in those cases when we know that this could be in the gray area, but it may not be necessary to bring back a project, we will call the chair, and we think that we can rely on the chair to remember the spirit and the mode of all of you, and then the chair could give us some direction as to, yes, you should bring this back, or maybe this is pretty consistent and in substantial compliance with what the decision was.
So I believe we're moving on to item number 3, unless there's any other questions, comments, concerns about number 2.
Okay, good. One of the most important things we want to make sure is very clear, particularly to all our board members and to the public, to our applicants, our clients that we serve, that the Design Review Board remains the decision-making body, and we will make a decision as to whether or not something is exempt from Design Review Board. That is the decision-making authority that we have, that we've been given by the code. That's item number 4. We can talk about that briefly if you have some questions about it. But for projects that come before you, the Design Review Board is the decision-making body. We see ourselves as advisors and facilitators of the process, advising the applicants, our clients, and advising yourselves. And so I think Tim Foy talked about the decisions that you can make in each of the meetings: approve with conditions, recommend, return for redesign, or deny a project proposal at the first hearing. At the second hearing, you can choose to approve with conditions, or deny a project proposal, but the return for redesign option is no longer open to you. Regarding preliminary review, that is a responsibility that Council has asked staff to take on in large part, and that's the process that we talked about in Section 2 of this discussion, where we are meeting with the applicants. That's essentially the preliminary review. There are some cases where the projects are larger and more complex than you're typically seeing. So in those cases, if the applicant does request a preliminary review, we will honor that request and bring that forward to you in the same manner that we previously did.
And in such a case, Ms. Reich, is the process then split up between preliminary design and final review, and that during preliminary design we have those 2 shots at going through the project, and then once it's approved on a preliminary level, they start working with you and getting ready for final review, in which case they could have 2 more opportunities to come in front of the board?
That's right. And we anticipate that you won't be seeing more than the 1 preliminary design review. I think typically the applicant would like to get your general feedback before they get too far down the line and then bring it forward to final review. So then item C, scope and priorities for review. The scope of review is really the focus is, and the code talks a little bit about this, and council also talked about this, is to really focus on the project, the exterior of the project, the volume of the project, how the project is compatible or not with the neighborhood. That is actually the key, as we understand it, the compatibility aspect. Does it fit in with its site, its surrounding neighborhood? And then is it of high quality? And our reports are designed to reflect those priorities. Insofar as the interior of the project is concerned, that is really outside the scope of the review. And we understand that every once in a while that the interior of a project will be discussed in a manner to assist the applicant with finding a solution to the exterior of the project, and we understand that's the intent of the board. That's our intent if it ever comes up in our informal meetings, but that's not always clear to the applicant. So we just wanted to clarify that in this presentation, that is your priority. We also did get a direction from the council that the priority is really the front of the project and what you really see from the public right-of-way, and that the rear of the project is secondary. in nature to that in the priority. We understand that the DRB always does look at a building or piece of architecture as a three-dimensional piece, and we also, in advising the applicants, we look at it in that way to have a level of consistency and quality around. But we do, in our discussions with the applicants, we do prioritize what you could really clearly see from the street primarily. And then getting back to the DRB priorities, we think that the process you have of applying conditions and recommendations, we think our experience of that is that it's working very well. We do our best in these meetings to repeat back to you so that we have a very clear understanding of what you said. Those conditions and recommendations appear again in the minutes, so it gets there is an opportunity, and we witnessed that this evening, where there was a very specific question. Because it's agendized in the minutes, that can be discussed. We anticipate that that will be rare because we do our best to have these kinds of interactions during the meeting. We always go back to this recording. We're very happy that we have a service that provides this recording, this archive for us and for the public that we can refer to. Have I? Okay. So that I believe is section 3. I'm hoping there's a clarity of what staff's responsibilities are vis-a-vis the board, and what the board's responsibilities are as well.
And I think what's also important to point out here is the fact that we had this conversation earlier as well. With the front being a priority, there's also another matter to discuss as well, which we usually do is, as there's different neighborhoods, there's different quality of construction within neighborhoods within Glendale. And we need to be somewhat cognizant of that as well, as we prescribe materials and windows and fenestrations and so forth. At times, homes are being done on a very slim budget. Let's say if it's an addition in certain parts of our city, and so we need to be cognizant that perhaps the focus should be more on the front. Maybe we should not be as picky about the sides or the rear, especially if they're not in the public's view, because at the end of the day, we're trying to facilitate good neighborhoods and good fabric within the street, so for it to be compatible, of course, with its surrounding neighborhood. So we're trying to improve that given area, so we should focus in on what's really visible as well. I wanted to bring that up as well. Okay, so we've gone through item number 3, and I believe the next one is council direction to staff regarding exemptions from DRB review.
Yes, council had asked us to present our policy for exemptions to them, which we did on April 15th. We brought forward a number of examples to the council. We talked about the code, of course, and the basic principles by which we review exemptions, and they're very simply put that they are, if we're reviewing a project for exemption, we need to make certain that we have enough information to see the full picture and analyze that with a similar kind of scrutiny as we would if it were going to the board. So that has been clarified, that we will need photographs of the existing house or building, and that we will often need photographs of the neighborhood, because this is really about how a project fits into a neighborhood. So we look at the change that is being made to a particular structure, and we look at how consistent that is with that structure, if it is consistent in its quality, if it diminishes the quality or design of that structure, or for an approval that you've previously given. We try to treat everything with that level of consistency. If we do have a question about something that has been changed or change that's requested, and of course it's always beneficial if a project that's moving through the construction process, rather than construct first, ask permission for it later, we always will advise our applicants that to come and talk to us first before spending the money to construct something on an approved design is really the prudent way to proceed, because we've been told by the council and also by DRB members when it has come up that just because something has been constructed, it's not an excuse for something that is of low quality. So whenever we have a question about that, we will bring that to the board. And so if there are more, if the board would like a more lengthy presentation on how we're doing the DRB exemptions, we can bring that presentation to you. I believe that tape is archived on the April 15th council meeting. Many community members came out. Many came to talk about how important the window changes, the window renovations and modifications are to the quality of their neighborhoods. That's primarily what we heard from the community. We did get council support and community support at that meeting for the policy that, and as we're conducting it on exemptions. So just as all of these policies, we think that this is a team effort with you and with the community, and we very much appreciate any feedback that you can provide to us on any of these matters. So if there are questions on that item, if not, we'd like to hear from you if there are issues that haven't been addressed in this discussion. If you would like to have additional sessions, study sessions, discussion sessions, that would help you in the work that you do here, because we want to let you know that we appreciate the formidable effort that you as volunteer board members make to the community in reviewing projects. We know that you visit the sites before coming here, are very familiar with the projects. You demonstrate that with the level of thorough discussion and thoughtfulness with which you discuss the projects, and we really appreciate that. We know that's appreciated by the community as well, so thank you very much for your service.
Well, do we have other issues or questions or items that we want to bring up?
I just have
at
one.
this point?
I still would like to get a little more clarification on how the 50% rule is applied. So I know it's written down and we have the descriptions of it, but I'm getting, I guess, I'm not totally clear on how that's...
That is a rather complex discussion, and we're thinking that might be something that we could prepare an explanation and discussion for you, because we know that comes up quite a bit in your discussions. If that's okay, we'd like to bring that back to you in the future.
Melanie? I don't have anything. I think pretty thorough coverage. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this was very helpful because it certainly gives us a good idea of staff's perception and also staff's approach, which is very important as we're going through these, so we appreciate it. And I think the system is working, as Mr. Aliano pointed out. We're getting projects that are well designed, and so staff has spent a lot of time with these projects, we could tell. really arm wrestling with the architects and the owners and so forth to get a project to a level that is able to go through the process that much quicker, so we appreciate it. And so I don't think we have any other items as it pertains to Design Review Board orientation, and so we could maybe move on to item number 7, which is adjournment. So if there's anything else?
Actually, I wanted to bring up one final issue. I just wanted to remind you that there's a Brown Act meeting or protocol training session on the 28th of January, it's a Monday, from 12:30 to about 2. Oh, I'm sorry, July 28th, I don't remember what I said. From 12:30 to 2, what did I say? January. Okay.
It's 8:50 in the evening, so we understand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It may go until about 2. It will be in, 2 in the afternoon. It's being held in MSB room 106, and lunch will be provided. So if you all are wanting to attend, let myself, Jay Platt, who's our historic preservation planner and is organizing the meeting, or I guess Billy and Nell.
Thank you, Mr. Kiesel.
Is there another time? Because I'm on vacation actually from the 28th until the 11th of August.
Not at this point, but as new board members come on, this will be probably a fairly regular training session.
Okay, so there'll be another opportunity.
Yeah.
You good?
That's all I had.
You'll be on vacation end of August? July?
End of July, beginning of August, yeah. So I'll be at the next meeting, but not the one after that.
Very good. All right, so I think we've covered all items on tonight's agenda. It was one that only had one hearing, but then a lot of other information that took us some time to go through. So do we want to entertain some sort of a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Adjourned.